you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And, just a little off screen there. This is the way to. Yeah, we'll pull this back. Yeah, that's a little bit of this. Pardon me. Yeah, I think we're gonna need to, well, we're a bit off screen there, but.
Move the whole table?
Yeah, maybe, Sandy, can you tell me, that's great. Just so you get it all on the screen there. Okay,
Come on.
perfect. We'll just raise this a bit.
There we go. You're higher down.
Oops. All righty, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everybody. All committee members, thank you for having us back as board. We are going to focus today on a few things. I wonder if I can just start as per the chair's prompt with the review of the governance and services study purpose. I always think it's helpful at the beginning of every meeting just to kind of go back very briefly to kind of the bigger picture on where we are in the overall process and talk a little bit about the study in which we are immediately engaged, and then get into some of the materials that we want to cover this evening. So by way of reminder, more than anything, we've got a governance and services study as the first phase of what could be a broader study process. And we went through that last time, and recall that we kind of had this slide on board where we said, the first thing we do is we raise the service and governance issues. So those issues were raised by the Electoral Area Director to the regional board, and the board then took it forward to the ministry and recommended or requested funding for a governance and services study. The study formed a committee. We have around the table today, the regional district formed the committee and now has struck the terms of reference and has started the study. We're doing that now. Coming out of this study will be some options identified for change, and some of those options may be within the current structure. And if that deals with the issues that we hear from the community and the concerns that we hear from the community with current governance and current services, then we would end. On the other hand, if the concerns that we hear and the interest that we hear prompt the committee to think we need to look at changes to the structure or outside of the structure, then we would potentially go back to the regional district, and the regional district would recommend to the ministry that a further study be taken on one or more of the specific options that are identified by the committee coming out of this study. The minister then would determine whether to commission a new phase, and that new phase would begin. There's that possible new study. So our study, to be clear then, just to remind everybody, is that first phase that we're in right now, where we're really hoping to identify from our interaction, from our engagement, not only with one another at the committee table, but also with the community, to hear about some of the issues, some of the concerns that exist in the community with respect to how we make decisions, governance, and how we provide services. And once we get that information, then we'll have a chance then to identify possible changes to make. So our study then, threefold purpose, really. The first is to document and to assess the current governance and services. And so I've got in parentheses there kind of what is, because as we talked about last time, really what we want to do, and it's a little bit, and you'll know from the size of the report that we're going to go through this evening, it's a little bit, well, it's involved, let's just say. So we go through in some detail to kind of talk about what is today, how are decisions made, what services are provided, who provides those, what do we pay for. And we'll get a sense that once we'll document all that out today, we will kind of go through and make sure we've got the information correct. And we're very happy to take comments on that and make corrections. And that's why we very clearly listed the report as draft, because we do want the community's feedback and input on that. The second purpose of the study then is to, once we have a very clear understanding of what is in place, we want to engage with the community to understand the concerns and the interests. And then finally, that third purpose is to identify changes to consider. So this meeting, we're going to focus on the first of those three purposes. So the what is in place now. And we're also going to just spend a little bit of time towards the end preparing for community engagement, and kind of going through the game plan for that and talking a little bit about what comes between now and June 7th, I believe, which is the first planned open house. And we'll come back to that at the end and explain to the committee how we're proposing to proceed to go into that with preparations. Shall I proceed, Mr. Chair, on to the next topic?
The draft interim report?
Yes. Okay. Here we are. So the interim report has a few, just by way of kind of the overview of the report and the table of contents, as it were. So we start with the regional district overview. We captured a little bit of that information last time. We'll just highlight a few bits this time. And I should mention, let me just pause for a moment and say that what we see in the draft, in the interim report, which currently is in draft form, but based on the feedback this evening will be finalized then. What we have in that will ultimately inform the materials we take to the public. Now, the public can certainly see the entire draft or this report if they wish to, but most people probably don't want to take the time to go through 60 pages of the information we've got there. That's the committee's job. You have to, you have no choice. But the public may not want to, so, but that's okay. It's there if they want it, but we'll also use that then to create some additional materials. So starting with the regional district overview, we want to look at the local government that's in place for the Northwest side. That's why we look at the regional district overview, because as you know, the regional district of Central Okanagan is the local government for the Northwest side. And we want to understand as we go through the bit on regional districts, the opportunities of the system, so how it's created and what we can get from the system, but also the limitations to the system. We want to then go and talk briefly about the Northwest Side community overview, and perhaps this area more than others, although others as well, will be one to which we'll look to the committee to add some meat to that perhaps, or to correct us where we've made some assumptions that have been wrong. We'll talk about the attributes of the community. We'll also talk about the implications of those attributes for governance and for service provision. So as we go through, we'll see the way we kind of characterize the community. What does that tell us about governance and service provision models, and what's kind of possible for this size community with these kinds of attributes? We're then going to spend a bit of time on the local services provided by the regional district and also by other bodies. We've got the two separate chapters in the paper that we'll bring together here. We want to look at how service provision works. We want to look at what the surprises are in some of the services that we see. There may be some surprises even for committee members, I'm not sure. And we want to think about some big takeaways from that. What is it? How do we use this information? What can we take away from this information? It's kind of a nice overview of everything that's in place, but what does it mean and how do we use it? Okay, let me jump in if I could then and kick off with, and we're gonna pause lots of time, hand it back to the chair and take questions as we go through and have discussion, because there's lots of discussion points, and we actually may pause to ask the committee questions to the chair, if that's okay. So when we look at regional districts, every regional district is a federation. So a federation, we noted last time, of municipalities and electoral areas. We are in, and there's 27 regional districts in the province. The entire province, except for the most northern parts of the province, are covered by regional districts. We had in a different study we were doing, we had which has more of an incorporation element to it. We had one person on the committee say, we got to incorporate because we got to get out of the regional district. And I said, well, this is like Hotel California. You can never leave. Like, you're either in as an electoral area or municipality, but you're in. So the federation. So here we see the regional district Central Okanagan. Of course, we've got our 4 municipalities, the largest being Kelowna, the smallest being Peachland, and we've got our 2 geographically large electoral areas on the east and on the west. And of course, in shaded in blue there is an approximation of the east and northwest side.
One thing with that map,
yes,
I would mention that if you look at that map, if you cut that line straight across from Lake Country, we'd be in a different regional district.
That's right. Yes. Yep. Yeah, we're right on
that
the
is
border.
us on the other side of the lake.
That's right. Yeah, we're right on the border there. Sure. Yeah. When we look at the and I was going to mention too. So we have a federation, but also a federation that exists first and foremost to provide services. And we talked about that last time a little bit. Every government exists to provide services, whether it's the federal government or the smallest village. But regional districts kind of specialize, if you will, in services in the sense they provide three different types of services. We've got our local services in the local areas, so community planning, administration, those kind of basic services that every area needs. We've got then our sub-regional services, so collections of jurisdictions, whether those be the electoral areas or an electoral area in a municipality or what have you. And then we've got our region services or region-wide services. Central Okanagan Economic Development Commission, for example, E911, those kinds of things. Governing body, as you know, we've got a board of directors. Every regional district has the board of directors, and we've got municipal directors who are appointed by their councils. Very important point, because they are not directly elected to the board, but they're appointed by their municipal councils. And we've got electoral area directors who are elected directly by the electors in their areas. We've got 2 electoral area directors, of course, 1 per electoral area in the RDCO, and then we've got 7 City of Kelowna municipal directors, and then 1 from Peatland, 1 from Lake Country, and 2 from the City of West Kelowna. We also have a Westside First Nation ex officio non-voting member. And the Kelowna has 7, of course, because it has such a large population. One point that we've made, I think it's in the past at least, is electoral areas, irrespective of their population, only have 1. So we can have electoral in some regional districts. Typically, what happens is when you have a municipal director who has, you can have a maximum of 5 votes per director. After that 5th vote, another director gets appointed to take the other votes. And so that's why Kelowna, with so many votes because of the population, has 7 directors. In other cases, or I was going to say in some other regional districts where we have very populated electoral areas, we actually have cases where an electoral area director may have 6 votes, because you never have more than 1 electoral area director for an area.
I believe that West Kelowna, Stephen and West Kelowna, I believe he only carries 3 or 4 out of the 5 votes.
Yeah, that would be correct. Yeah, so they would split them down the middle, kind of thing. Yes.
And Lake Country must be getting close to
Lake Country, I think, yeah, Lake Country must be getting pretty close to the second one for sure. Yeah,
Maybe next
population. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so voting rules. We talked a little bit about voting rules last time. We've got our different types of votes. We've got our corporate votes and we've got our stakeholder votes. When we look at corporate votes, there's weighted and unweighted. The unweighted votes, 1 vote per director. Every director votes. So that's for creating an establishing bylaw. By the way, that's even for creating an establishing bylaw for a service that doesn't get provided across the region. Everybody in the region votes on it. Every director in the region votes on it, even if their jurisdiction doesn't actually see the service. And that's because the corporate body is the regional district board, and the board then is in the regional district is liable for that service, irrespective of how many people are provided to and where it's provided. So everybody gets a vote on it. And it's a point that doesn't sit well with everybody, because it's why are others voting on something that we're need here, but it's a feature of the system.
I've had some I'd like to get into, but I think probably wait till we get to the
Sure.
service parts, and then we can discuss the individual services that it affects.
Okay, we can do that for sure. So the corporate vote we talked about, the unweighted vote, excuse me. The corporate weighted vote, that's made for all financial matters, so passing budgets and so forth, and that's where everybody gets a different number of votes based on population. So Kelowna has 33 votes, and we see that Kelowna then, out of a total of 52 votes, by the way, this is the 2016 numbers. In the paper, we've approximated 2022. However, I learned shortly after pressing send on the paper that there's some changes coming up. So Kelowna will stay at 7 directors. They're going to change the voting units to do that. So
Is that being approved?
no, it's with the province now, but we expect to.
And I think that the number they selected is going to make that change very minimal and not last very long.
Okay, yeah,
Kelowna's just going so fast.
that's true. Yes,
Yeah, so they didn't pick the highest number. I think we were looking at 6 or 6,500.
Yeah.
And I think they selected 5,000, so it didn't put it up that much. It doesn't change it that much.
Okay, so maybe next census we'll do it again. So anyway, the corporate weighted votes then, those are all financial matters. Everybody gets the number, the directors get the number of votes depending on the commensurate with the population they represent. But we see here in this case, looking at our 2016, and it will be the same for 2021 census when it comes out, is that the city of Kelowna, because of its size relative to others, does get weighted corporate votes, does get kind of the ability, assuming all of its directors vote in the same way, to, in essence, kind of make the decision. And that's not, there are a number of regional districts like that. Sherry and I were actually yesterday in regional district of Nanaimo. It's the same dynamic there. The city of Nanaimo has the more than half of the total votes in weighted vote scenarios. So it is a feature of regional districts where we not only kind of collaborate in the provision and the paying for services, but also in making decisions on matters of the board and service matters. When we look at the different voting rules, we see we've got this table in the text, and we talk about the different types of services. And I talked about the local services provided to electoral areas, and we've broken that down at the bottom of the table there to be local services provided to only to the Central Okanagan West electoral area, so the whole area. And then even within that, we've looked at just local services provided just to the northwest side, so a portion of that area. We then look at the sub-regional services where we've got 13 of those in the region. These are services that Northwest side participates in, or Central Okanagan West, participates in. And then we've got 15 region-wide services that everybody participates in. And then when we look in the right-hand column, we say, well, who gets to vote in stakeholder votes, whether it's a corporate vote a stakeholder vote is when you're dealing with making bylaws to deal with the administration and operation of the service. And in most cases, for Central Okanagan West and for the Northwest side, it is the entire board that votes. There are some cases when directors from participating jurisdictions only on the sub-regional services will vote on those bylaws. But in many cases, it's the entire board of directors will vote.
So we're right now at this point, neither myself nor the director from the other side feel that there are any stakeholder votes as you would understand a stakeholder vote.
Yes, and that's probably accurate to that. Yeah. Yes. You're Mr. Chair, please have a question. Yeah.
Is that by statute or is that?
That is by statute. Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for asking the question though, because it is important. Actually, it's really important. That's a perfect question to ask because it's very important because as we, at the back of our minds, as we're going through this stuff, we're thinking, okay, what's wrong with this from our perspective and what could come in place of it? And I know that there's been discussion, there's lots of different options that have been discussed. There's been incorporation discussed, there's been joining a new regional district, there's been changes within the existing structure of the RDCO, all those kinds of things. Dwayne's asked a very good question because even under that other regional district option, if that is a change that the committee and the RDCO and the ministry decide they want to pursue at some point, and I don't wish to prejudge that, that's going to be a discussion for later, you still have the same rules in place for there. Now, Director Carson would probably jump in and say you have more stakeholder votes and you got more electoral only votes, and that's true as well because you've got more electoral areas.
And one example is actually on the next page from their page 18. We've got a sentence in there. It says the act allows participants to withdraw from most services if service reviews do not satisfactorily address concerns. And I know I'm the other electoral area director from the other side. In the last term, tried a couple of times to get us some services, and it wasn't going to be allowed because it was a split service. Everybody was paying for it, and if we withdraw, then the cost of them would go up somewhere. So well, we just wasn't going to happen for us.
Sure, yeah, and again, that's another that service withdrawal provision where, and just to kind of as a small aside on that, one of the premise on which service provision for regional districts is based is that it's a collaborative process. So different jurisdictions, this is somewhat academic, but it's also practical in most cases. Different jurisdictions choose, except where services are mandated. Different jurisdictions choose to collaborate together in the provision of a service. In the regional district, is the framework to allow that to happen, the vehicle for providing the service. So in a sense, when a jurisdiction chooses to join a service of the regional district, that jurisdiction is surrendering a certain amount of authority to the regional district to provide that service on behalf of the jurisdiction. In the same way that you can surrender your authority to provide a service, you can also, under the legislation, take it back and withdraw from the service. In most cases, there are 4 services that you cannot withdraw from by law. And one of those is transit, one is regional parks, and then administration. And so these kinds of things. And transit and regional parks, because they involve such a huge capital expenditure that if you kind of went in and then you skip town, you'd have everybody else holding the bag. So that's not on. So, but in most cases, you have the legal authority to initiate a service review. And if you don't like how that went, you can then have the legal authority to initiate withdrawal. And as Director Carson kind of alluded to a moment ago, is that sometimes the price of exit is prohibitive or high enough that people choose not to exit. And so that can be different. Now, but it's the reason I'm mentioning this is because those rules, in the same way as Wayne asked, are the voting rules part of statute? The rules around review and withdrawal are also part of statute. So you have the same dynamic in other jurisdictions. And I've done a number of service reviews for Regional District North Okanagan. And there, they kind of went on forever, which is usually awesome for a consultant. But but after a while, it was like, God, get me out of this. But anyway, but in those cases, nobody withdrew from the services either, even though they weren't super happy in all cases. But it just the price of exit was too much because there was compensation that had to be paid and those kinds of things.
Well, one example that I had was actually just electoral area regional district service when we developed delivered to the electoral areas, and it was noise abatement. What happened is we had a resident making multiple complaints, and their service was cut off by the regional district for noise. So they started directing those complaints to the RCMP, and they generated over 150 calls in 1 year. The RCMP, and so I wanted to withdraw from the noise abatement because there was only one person making any complaints. We're living in a rural area, and I couldn't get out of that. And that wouldn't have cost anybody, any of the municipals wouldn't have cost them any money.
Yes,
But that was the reasoning that I had for that. It was sort of noise abatement was not something that the regional district was going to be able to enforce because it usually happens after 10, 11 o'clock at night. And when the RCMP got involved, it just, like I talked to the staff sergeant.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things, and I don't know the details of that, and we don't have time to go into the details of every story, but so I have a feeling you have 2 stories.
just when they're pertinent.
Yes. But that said, one of the things about the review and withdrawal, and by the way, those provisions are new as of 2001. Prior to that, when you were in the service, you were in it. So in 2001, the government, the province brought in some of these new provisions. And one of the things about that is you have kind of a statutory review and you have a non-statutory review. Most places take the non-statutory route first, and they start by saying, like, hey, we don't like how this service, we don't like being in the service, we don't like how it's paid for, we don't like some aspect of it. So the board will typically then, in response to concerns raised, will do a more informal review to see how we can fix things. If that doesn't, and that might have been what kind of they undertook or what you had some discussions on. Every jurisdiction, though, has also the authority under the Local Government Act to initiate a statutory review. And the rest of the board can't say no at that point. You have to actually go through a process. And I just finished facilitating one in Comox Valley Regional District where the town of Comox initiated a statutory review. And it took a year, and it was expensive for all parties, but at the end of that, they withdrew from the service. And so it is possible to do, it's just a process you have to follow. And that provision exists in every place. And so, and in fact, at one point, there were 19 statutory reviews underway in Regional District North Okanagan. And they were all triggered by the city of Vernon. So be careful what you wish for. Yeah. Okay. we've got finance. So we're gonna get into finance a little bit more later, but just kind of an overview of finance. And I think we talked about this earlier. And actually, sorry, Dwayne, you don't have to go all the way in the back here. This is, I know that notice is from the back, but it's, I didn't mean to, there you go. I'm impressed you knew exactly where to go in the report, though. That's great. Gold star for Dwayne. Okay, when we look at finance, this is a sample tax notice. It doesn't, of course, look exactly like the tax notices you get. For one, because you don't get a logo at the regional district center of Okanagan because the tax notice comes from the province. But, and it's not laid out exactly like this, but the content is more or less the same. And what we see on these tax notices is that there is a separate rate and a separate charge for every service. So in Northwest Side, you've got 36 services of the regional district you're part of. And then you've got a couple of services from the province as well. And every one of those, you'll know from your tax notice, has a separate line. And that's unique to regional districts. And it is actually a feature that makes regional districts very transparent in the sense, and very accountable in that sense, because you see what you're paying for every service. In a municipality, it's a much different situation, of course, where you get, it's a very short notice, and it's a general tax, general municipal tax, and you get one number, and that number goes to the city, and the council then determines how they want to divvy up its pool of funds. And it's much more difficult to figure out exactly how much is gone to different services. One of the other points in here as well is that when you look at the amount that is charged, that is paid for a service, that amount includes not just the direct costs involved in the service, but also the indirect costs of the administrative overhead. So in a city, you'll have a separate kind of line item in the budget for administration overhead or something that will just be absorbed into the corporation. In the regional district, by law, they need to take the administrative overhead, which will include the salary of the CAO and the salary of the chief financial officer and HR and IT and all these other things. They take all those costs and they spread them across every service. So they allocate those costs to the different services. And so the cost we see then for each individual service includes that overhead. Okay, let me pause there, Mr. Chair, and just see if there are any discussion points or questions with respect to that first chunk about regional districts.
Anybody have any comments, questions?
Question. Page, where are we here? 19. Before we get halfway done with the property taxes. Prior paragraph.
Go ahead, yes, please.
Last two sentences. Exactly what that's saying.
And so where were we there? Oh, I think you're right.
The tax relinquish.
19. Oh, we got it. Okay.
Maybe you're on the
I can
PDF.
actually tell you this. So the $1.19 million will be for everything that you see on this tax notice here, and the $1.1 million will be for the water systems, I believe. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
because
because page is 19.
It is page 19, and it starts, the tax requisition for services provided by the electoral area as a whole is 1.19 million.
Okay.
So that would be for all, everything, and then the old portions, I believe that would be the water systems. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. We don't have a full package, I just have a report, so what I printed off was different.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, okay. You're with page 8. This is 19 of the package. Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
All right.
Page 8. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Yes. So what do we got here? The total tax. Okay, so what we've got then is, so for the entire electoral area, we've got, if we go, and we'll get to this when we look at our property, get down our notice there at the end, and so sure, we'll go through this a little bit later in the program, but in essence, just to answer the question now, Josh, what we've got then is for all, there's a set of services that are provided to the entire electoral area. So not just Northwest Side, but every other piece of property in Grant Road, for example, in Westside.
Community parks.
Community parks, yes, thank you. And so the total requisition, the amount that's collected from electoral area or central West electoral area is 1.2 million, 1.19 million. Then we have a requisition for local services provided only a portion. So that's where we'll have, we've got a number of local services, like 5 different local services.
Community hall, the water system.
So 2.3 is getting collected in total, of which 1.1 is being used local, 1.19 is being used for.
Oh, yes.
Greater services.
You got it. Yes.
Having just a difficult time reconciling.
Okay, well, that's good. We'll make a note of that and clarify that.
The $1.1 million won't show up on this.
No.
That's the quarterly billing that you get from the regional
That's
district for transfer site and that's it.
Yeah.
That would cover that.
That's what it implies, I didn't quite understand, so.
Pretty sure that's what they
Okay,
need.
we will clarify that, Bill, and make sure. Thank you for that.
I got one thing on, we get down to, page 9 or page 20, whichever way, when you're going by. It has, the amount, when it talks about a grant, it says the grant was $110,000, but it doesn't define how much went east, how much went west.
That's correct.
And there's some more on the other side of the page where again, you get one number, and that's one thing that I've always complained about at the regional district. When they give you one number that covers both electoral areas, I'm interested in the number that reflects Central Okanagan West.
Got it. Okay, let's try, we'll see what we can find that number and make sure that's in there. Thank you very much. Okay, that's great. Well, now, let me, I wonder if I can just, maybe I can ask a question of the group, Mr. Chair, is that it? Yeah, we've learned, and you know, you knew coming into this already, of course, and we've learned a little bit more about regional districts and the system. So I'm just curious, is it, what are your impressions of kind of the model, the regional district model with the different voting and the different types of services and the different, and the transparency on the tax notice? Is there something that kind of, do you see some benefits to it? Do you see some kind of cost to it or some bad sides to it, disadvantages?
First of all, it's stuck with.
Yes, you are.
And in a location where you have any less than 2 electoral areas, you don't really have the opportunity to have electoral area advisory committees. So you have to have a board of the whole sitting down listening to an issue that might be pertaining just to one fraction area.
Yeah.
And then when it becomes issues, this becomes something like. So plan, zoning, does that have to come up on board as a whole vote? And is it a weighted vote or is it an unweighted vote? And how are electoral areas able to have vested over their own land use? And that is something.
Yes, we're coming to that. Yes. Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and it is one of those. And RDCO is a little unique in that we've got a system where it's a little bit historical, but where municipalities were able to pay to join a portion of kind of a type of membership in the electoral area planning to have a say on the things that happen in the border.
Slightly the same in Butler where you have control.
Yeah, we cover that.
But that was something that I certainly noticed as being an advantage and disadvantage to the system.
And it is, and you've made some really good points, Josh, and I think that one is that you talk about the number of electoral areas to begin with. You're right, RDCO is unique, not completely unique, but it's somewhat unique in having only 2 electoral areas. I worked at the Vancouver Regional District for a few years, and there we have 1 electoral area. Now, they still had an electoral area advisory committee, and they did that by bringing on directors from smaller communities that kind of surrounded or were in the middle of parts of the electoral area. And it was an advisory committee chaired by the electoral area director, and it dealt with all of the provided recommendations, all planning applications and all those kinds of things that came to that committee first before going to the board. And they did that for 2 reasons. One, or they had this committee for 2 reasons. One was because even though you only had 1 electoral area, it was deemed important by the board to give a forum for those matters to be discussed. And with some kind of focus as well, that it wouldn't get to the board table. And then the other reason we did it was because the board recognized that it wanted to position itself as a board that was focused on the broader region. And its discussions at the board table focused on those regional issues, regional advocacy issues, regional service issues. And it didn't want to take the time to kind of dig into, to deal with just the issues affecting one small electoral area. Even though the board was the local government for that area, we wanted to be able to give a separate forum for those discussions. So you can still have, even though you've only got two, you can still have a committee and be structured in different ways. It wouldn't be only the electoral area directors on that committee. We would have some others as well to kind of round it out a bit. And but that's the first point I wanted to make. The other point, if I can remember what my train of thought here was, Sherry's always. I'm positive that I got three things to say. One, two, and I can't remember the third. Yeah. No, it was. I'll come back to me. Sorry. Land use. Yes, thank you. So, on the control area, the authority. Yes. It's a very good example of how in the regional district system, one of the features of the system, which can really be chafing for some areas, is that not only do you share kind of resources to provide services, and because a lot of the services that you get here, actually probably all of the services you get in the Northwest side, you wouldn't have the ability on your own to have the infrastructure to provide those services. And that's no reflection, no poor reflection on the Northwest side. That's just a function of economies of scale, what you need to have an organization. So somebody has to provide it, but in order to kind of get that machine, as it were, in place to provide those services, everybody kind of kicks into that. Everybody feels that there's resources to kind of hire the people, and then those costs are allocated appropriately. They also then share power, share control. And that is something that chafes a lot of people, and it's something that others, particularly in the regional districts that have many electoral areas, see as common. So RDNO, for example, where you've got a number of electoral areas, the sharing of authority, of voting power on different things is not typically seen as a bad thing in a lot of cases. In some cases it's going to be, but not in a lot of cases. Whereas in other regional districts, people are quite upset that other directors from other jurisdictions get some say over matters in one jurisdiction.
Where I was going on more than anything else is, so for example, when it comes to land use issues,
Yes.
in North, when they do their voting on bylaws, it becomes a 2/3 majority vote. Compared to North, you're not able to have that same 2/3 majority vote amongst your electoral area directors. For Kelowna, it's on the board,
Yes.
and them themselves are what, 61% of the weighted electoral votes,
Yes.
and 50% plus of the unweighted electoral votes.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's where
Yeah.
an interesting element.
You're absolutely right. Yes, absolutely right. And different regional districts will have different dynamics. We are in a smaller group of regional districts that have one very dominant player. So, whether it's Central Okanagan, Kelowna, Nanaimo, regional district, Nanaimo, Fraser, Fort George, or Prince George, there are a few regional districts in the province that have one very dominant player. And then there are a number of regional districts, I know is one, for example, North, and others that have more dispersed power. And so you don't get the same kind of built-in ability for one jurisdiction to exercise control.
I just want to touch on the electoral area committee so that this committee knows. I approached the previous chairs on several occasions, and the current chair, when he was first elected, asking for an electoral area governance committee. And the makeup that I was looking at was 2 electoral area directors and 1 representative from each of the 4 municipalities to sit on a committee of 6, where we could discuss electoral area committee stuff on one of the 2 meetings, like happens in North. They have 1 meeting that's electoral area, 1 full board meeting, so we could have our committee meeting, discuss it where we're not overwhelmed by numbers on the board when we're talking about a local issue, just is the northwest side or central Okanagan West, I get to speak once every 13 times. And the rest of the board has the right to put their opinions forward and the rest of that. So it makes it very difficult to try and make a point about something that just pertains to our area. Everybody so far up till now has refused to be considered the electoral area committee, which I think would have been a good midway solution to the problem that we're at now. It would allow us to put our issues forward, debate them in a reasonable manner with people, and then as in North, anything that came from that committee would go to the full board. If they wanted to open it up, they could, but usually it just moves forward as a rubber stamp at that point because the other committee has already looked at it. So I just wanted you to know that that is something that one of the solutions I did try and couldn't get any traction on it.
That doesn't really change voting power at the end of the day.
Excuse me, for a minute. People online are having a really hard time hearing. If everybody could just introduce themselves, people online can start speaking.
Sorry, Colin. That doesn't really change the voting power at the end of the day. It influences.
It influences it in a lot heavier way than we're able to do now, because the discussion with a smaller group would be a better discussion. No one community would dominate that. And obviously when it goes to the full board, they want to open it up and discuss it fully, then they would. But I found over the years that I've heard many times at the regional board table that they're tired of listening to the electoral area stuff. So I suspect that if we handled it properly in a committee with a representative from each one of the 4 municipalities, that maybe not right away, after a little bit of time, I think that it would work out well for us, and it would give us better governance within the community here. But I've been turned down on every occasion.
Just to respond to your question, what I see, really, given that this is such a prescribed process, this is extremely prescribed. Not a lot of room here to make that. So, given that, and given kind of the statutory structure of the police, I can't see another option other than for community like this to try to optimize themselves within a regional district group. Because at the end of the day, your politics really tied to structure.
And commonality of interests.
Yeah.
So I'm baffled a little bit by the fact that this isn't really clear, because there's not a lot of other options than this. So, I mean, whether it's a right or wrong decision, I don't know.
When you say this, what are you referring to?
Looking at optimizing yourself, where do you tie yourself?
Okay, so which regional district you're part of, you mean? Okay. Well, now there are, so if I may, just as a response, yes, so that kind of structural change is one option. I don't think, and I don't think anybody's put this forward, but as we get into the looking at the northwest side community, I think that incorporation would be problematic for the for a number of reasons we're talking about. That said, the other option is to say, and I know that there's been some attempts at this with 2017 study that was done and so forth. The other is to say, okay, how do we optimize ourselves within this existing regional district? And so Director Carson has identified one option, which is I know you have frustration trying to get it off the ground, but which is, let's look at a community structure. So that's one option you can do. You can also, there's also community commissions is another tool that's in the regional district legislation.
Are there any systems
There's
now?
a few, but not many. Yeah, they're not common for sure.
I do know one up north that bear.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
There's one in Lava,
Oh, is there?
yeah, water, it's not,
Or just water?
yeah. That's
Okay.
the service they look after, but not a good
So-
I think there's 3 last time.
So not real popular.
I don't think it's a tool that's been used,
They've been around for 30 years. I
been
think.
around, yeah, it's only been tried a few times. I think it has potential to be used in different ways, but it hasn't, we don't have a lot of examples to draw, put it that way.
Okay.
But it does keep getting put forward by the province and others as an opportunity. Like if people want to look at it. A community commission is like a separate, smaller, kind of sub-council almost of an electoral area where you have the electoral area director appointed, and you have a few people kind of elected within the community, sit on a council authority. You don't, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, it could be delegated authority for certain, over certain services. So if there's certain services in your northwest side, so looking after the free water systems or providing input on whatever. So it's a miniature version. It's almost like testing out an incorporation kind of with limited authorities and input.
Questions?
Almost like a board of barons.
Not so much important, more like an improvement district. Yeah. Board of Variance kind of has a very specific role. It only needs to certain things, but it's more like, as Sherry said, being responsible for either a or a set of services.
It's terrible. Doesn't require board's approval to have these modifications.
Absolutely, yes. And so, I think that when we go down the road then of saying, okay, now let's keep in mind though, before we kind of write that off as an impossibility. That's
Going by past experience.
Okay, fair enough, not quite, okay, but there hasn't been this kind of provincial study then where the committee will come forward at the end with recommendations. So that will kind of add some weight to. Now, that said, there are certain things, there's a few structural things within the existing regional district committee commission. There's then kind of less formal things, and I know some of the tried communications, those kinds of things, different ways of handling meetings. And then, as you pointed out, then there's the other option, which is to say, let's make a change to the structure rather than the structure. But go ahead.
So, question, and probably know what boundaries are. Do we have the option to pick a better team, be sovereign? In other words, can we, do we have the option of joining, seceding from here and joining the Plumbing Shoe Shop? Or is candidates the big one to merit? But we need bullies to merit. And, well, in population, we've got, I don't know, is there a place where we,
Yeah, well, more
people?
sure.
I mean, have the options.
Yeah, yeah. It's you don't get. It's not like a menu you get to pick from. It's more.
It's just advertising.
There have been changes to regional district boundaries, yes, but they are always kind of with contiguous jurisdictions. So really the old
Fire is joined us with Eric and Kamloops.
yes, but to get, I don't think it would be very practical because to get to Merritt, you've got to drive through RDCO. To get to RDNO, you can just go right up there, right? So
It's almost the same as kind of drives with traffic.
yes, well, fair point. I can't argue there.
Carrie, I just want to clarify a bit of the process. I just want to back up a little bit because there's all this talk and I'm getting a little bit confused and a lot of historical stuff that's coming up, and I'm new to the community, so the historical stuff is kind of really doesn't, I just don't have any investment in it, so I'm like, okay, moving right along. But my understanding of the process is that we'd be looking at, right now, we're looking at kind of the relationship with the RDCO, my understanding, so I'm hoping that you can clarify.
Sure.
And what can be done, is there things that can be done and recommendations that can be made so that the relationship's better and everyone kind of gets what they want out of the current relationship under the current statutes, under the current structure, and that we'd have to go through that process before the minister would even consider doing changes to what regional district we belong to. Like I kind of see it as a bit of a process, or that was my understanding. So before we even like talked about up here, we sort of had to address some issues that maybe are causing the overarching.
I think we want to, excellent question. So when we look at our process, right now, the process we're at is starting at saying, let's all get on the same page with what's in place today. That's the first thing. The second thing is that let's hear from the community as representatives of the community, and let's hear from the community directly what you think about what's in place today. Is it working for you? Do you have concerns? What are the concerns? Then we say, okay, based on what we hear back from the committee and the community, what could be some changes that we could recommend in order to address these concerns? Now, some of those changes are going to be, and we want to be very honest, open about them. We don't want to leave rocks unturned. So we want to say some of the changes, to your point, Gary, some of those changes are going to be achievable within the current structure, within our DCO. And we want to make sure that we explore those, or we lay out what those could be. We also probably say, the committee is completely within its rights to say, we also want to look at, or think based on what we've heard, that we should consider also this other option. And so the committee can go forward even with kind of two sets of changes to consider. And then based on the discussion that comes out that with the committee, with RDCO, with the ministry, then say, okay, let's either give it a shot to work internally, or let's say we want to commission a study to look at the full range of those, both internal and external. But I think to your point, and I'm really glad you mentioned it, because in all of these studies, it's very easy to get ahead of ourselves, and I've been guilty of that too, kind of looking down the road here. But we do want to kind of keep open mind, irrespective of history. We want to stay open minded as we go forward. But maybe there are changes we can deal with internally, and that meets the and we don't even know yet the full range of concerns we're going to hear back from the community. So
I'm just getting the sense that there's like a lot of history that is kind of moving things forward as opposed to wanting to move things forward. And I think there's a lot of new people that are coming to the community.
Yep.
And I feel that they may get sucked into that history before there's even the opportunity to say what really is working well and what can we do. So as a newcomer, that's definitely the feel that I'm getting. And so
no,
I just wanted to.
that's a really good point.
Where the community expressed and what is working. And there were recommendations made. And here we are in 2022 with none of those being taken place.
Nothing's really been resolved.
I did ask in the first meeting about what happened with that 2017 report, and also wanted clarification with this study, and if there's going to be any accountability by the RDCO to look at it and attempt to make those changes. And I think you answered that in the first meeting. And something the RDCO did as well was that it would be brought up with the board, and it would be very transparent about addressing those concerns. So it may be different from the 2017 study in that there's a little bit more weight behind it now.
And I think yeah, no, okay, I think that also there have been, I mean, maybe not to the satisfaction of everybody, but there have been some changes made in 2017.
Scott Graham, chair speaking. My question to Alan is, I've never understood why we are not part of North versus Central Vermont, because all of our services were closer to Vernon, with the lake, with the hospitals, and with schools, hopefully. It was all recreational facilities in Vernon. Kelowna, for anybody that's north of Fringe, is just, a 1 month, trip.
It's a very good question, Mr. Chair, and I think that as is often the case with these kinds of things, it was in 1965 when the province drew the boundaries. The settlement patterns would have been different then. They might have drawn it for kind of coincide with different natural features, or they might have looked at kind of, well, what's the driving distance from here to there? There was probably a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe it was just simply we had somebody in Victoria drawing. I don't know. But that said, the important takeaway, however, is that and we talked a little bit about this last time, as communities change, as needs change and concerns arise or issues arise, and as the world around them changes. So Vernon and North Okanagan develops in a certain way, Central Okanagan develops in a certain way. It is very possible, and in fact, the province, the ministry, a big part of the ministry's purpose is to allow this to happen, to look at changes to those things. So these boundaries that were created in 1965 aren't necessarily there for all times. They're not sacrosanct. They're there for now until there's a very good reason to change them. But as I mentioned earlier, I've been a part of a number of studies that looked at change that ended up in changing regional district boundaries, in addition to amalgamation of municipalities and so forth. Sorry? And so it's very possible. I just want to get it. Yes, yes, it has. Yeah. So if we look down in the Fraser Valley, for example, there used to be 4 regional districts in the Fraser Valley. There's now 1. And that was in 1995. Actually, one of the very first studies I was involved in as a consultant. I just dated myself, but one of the very first studies was looking at how do we change these boundaries around. And Metro Vancouver's boundary has changed about 10 times in the last 50 years.
We have far more in common with the small towns up north. And even Vernon is such a small city. Didn't do Rome or some area.
And that's a really legitimate point, is that you know, these things, we tend to think of them often, they get reduced sometimes to just technical exercises, but a lot of it is sense of community. And a lot of it is, where do you do your shopping? Where do your kids go to school? You know, where do you go to for entertainment? Those kinds of things.
Wayne Carson, just to remind everybody what Alan said right at the beginning about regional districts. Their primary function is to deliver services to us. And the regional district delivers a certain set of services. And from my perspective, those same services that we get from Cord would be delivered by Nord anyhow. Those aren't the ones that I'm so much concerned with at the moment. It's the ones that are delivered by the province that come to us from the north. And we have no say in those services. Those are critical services to us as a community. That's your police, your ambulance, hospital, roads, schools, those sort of things. And that's something that we're looking at in this process. That's very important. And one of the major elements here is to try and achieve a voice in those services that are up there, that are delivered to us as far as your parks and your planning and the rest of that. Those are the same services that the North Okanagan Regional District delivers to their electoral areas. And as far as the map goes, I suspect that if you look back at the map there where that straight line was, if you look across where we are, I think they just extended where Okanagan Indian Band lands ended in 1965 for their reservation there. And that's where the line is from. Okay, because when you're sitting in Victoria, a map is a line on each state. Right, so that wasn't taken into consideration, but you're right, we have Vernon phone numbers, the majority of us, Vernon addresses, so it makes it difficult. But yeah, those are the services, provincially delivered services that are a real concern to me, because we have no say in those services.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor the point, we'll get into it a little bit, but some would argue that you would still have no say in the services, because the province just doesn't that minister, like the police, they will listen a little bit, but not a lot. And so
4 times a year, the RCMP, including the superintendent, attend the Electoral Area Governance Committee meetings.
Okay.
And the rest of the services, forestry,
yeah,
highways ready, those by request, and that's the thing, when they call highways in and they have the Electoral Area Committee in the north, they're talking about our roads out here. But there's 5 people in there, and they're concerned about their roads out there.
That's a good point. Yes, it is a different dynamic, and you will get, to the chair's point, you will get more commonality with other smaller groups. Shall we just go, just in the interest of time, Mr. Chair, we just move through and we'll stop again in a few minutes and have some more discussion. Then we've got some questions as well for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, when we look at Northwest Side community, so first of all, we've got some population figures in there, and I understand, Director Carson, you kind of practiced the figures, I think.
Yeah, what happened is I talked to Todd in Community Services at the Regional District, and he gave me the mapping that comes along with the census, and I found that there's about 5 different maps, 6 different maps that covered central Okanagan West. 2 of them are to our area here. One is Westside Road from West Shores to Lacassa to the lake, and the other one is Westside Road from West Shores to Lacassa to the back of the mountain. And outside of the existing subdivisions within our community, there is nobody behind us. So I took the breakdown that they gave me there and found that in 2016, we had 1,349 people in the Northwest Side Fire Protection District. And 52.1% were permanent residents. In 2021, we had 2,105 people, and 67.5% of those are permanent residents. So people are moving in, and they're moving in as permanent residents. So the 45.5% increase that happened in central Okanagan West almost was exclusive to Northwest Side. There's not a lot of building lots left in the Wilson's Landing Traders Cove. There's 10 left in Traders Cove. Trapani actually lost a home over that period of time. And there's a lot of going on in Brent Road as well, because they're all waterfronts, pretty much all built up.
Randy, the 2 dates of those census?
What
was the 2 dates?
2016 and 2021. Those are the federal census.
5 years went from 52 to 67% for permanent residents.
52.1% in 2016 and 67.5% in the 2021 for permanent residents.
That's huge.
It is a big increase.
In a short time.
So that's it, and you know, they've got the structures and the rest of that are in there, but
Thank you very much. That's excellent. So we've got the population figures then. A lot of growth in the Northwest Side, growth not only in absolute numbers, but also the number of permanent.
so sorry, Alan, just one more thing right now, page 22 or page 11, whichever one. The overview of the community.
Yep.
I notice here that you have West Shores, Killiney Beach, Upper Fringe, and Lacassa, south to Caesar's Landing. We're missing a lot of our different communities in there. It would be nice to see
Let's
them
put
all
them all in
named.
there, yeah.
If you want to give me a call or something, I'll follow down the lake there and give you the
Okay.
names of all.
Thank you.
Because we are over a dozen communities.
No, that's great. We don't want to leave anybody out. Thank you.
No. Thank you.
Yes. Interesting, just when we look at the demographics, now this is 2016, so this is prior to the numbers that we just heard from Director Carson for 2021 census. So these numbers, we didn't have this breakdown for 2021, but I'm sure we'll have it soon. But what we do see is kind of relative to the rest of the region and the rest of British Columbia, we see quite a bit older median age and older population. So, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you. We'll take you up for it.
Yeah, that's right. Kick my butt. Okay. So anyway, but this could change then if we have a lot more families moving in and so forth. But I suppose that given that we don't have a school and so forth, that's maybe not surprising then that we're going to have that population. When we look at Central Okanagan West relative to the other jurisdictions of the regional district, we see there that we are, and this is from 2021 census. So we see there that we are the smallest, except for that green part, which is the numbers on West Bank First Nations IR 9 and 10, which are relevant for voting purposes, but otherwise not part of the area. Housing, we see a dominance of single-family housing, perhaps not unsurprisingly, and so that's not different than a lot of other parts of the Okanagan, but certainly than some of the urban areas, but put into single family. Assessment base is quite interesting. So when we look at the assessment base here, what we see on the left is the Central Okanagan West, the entire electoral area. And the green bit there is business at about 2%, and residential is a little over 97%. So very residential focused, as we would expect in an electoral area, on the edge of kind of different municipalities with their own commercial areas. But it's quite extreme when we look at Northwest Side in particular, where almost 100% is residential, 2% business assessment. So that would be probably the CASA, I'm guessing.
Gas is the only.
The CASA then, okay, that would be it. So very small amount of business. And I put this up here, it's interesting because it does speak then to, when we look at the nature of a tax base, we look at kind of two elements. One is the overall size of the tax base, because that will kind of, and both these elements kind of influence the ability to provide or to receive services and pay for those services. So we look at the size of the tax base, but we also look at the diversity of the tax base. And if we were looking at incorporation, and I know we're not going there, but if we were, we would be very troubled by looking at 99.8% residential. Yes.
We can take into consideration the amount of rent.
Well, yes, and yeah, we sure would. Yeah, we sure would. And if we accept that, if we accepted that, and I do for one, that the residential the assessment of an individual property is a form of wealth. And that we can tax that wealth, then yes, you can provide a lot more services using those.
Sure, the province and district.
I think business tax base was double residential, and the waterfront is.
And the tax rate, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, so in the regional district, we are legislated on what the multiplier is for, yeah, so if we have a residential rate of 1, the business rate is 2.45.
And on a waterfront property would probably be closer to 10.
No, waterfront is residential. It's the
No, I
same
mean
rate.
tax, I mean, as
Oh,
far
not
as
the
the tax
bringing in,
rate
for sure,
goes,
yes,
yes, as to
yes.
what you're bringing in.
Absolutely, because it's all a function, you pay based on the value of the place.
Yes,
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Yeah, and actually interestingly, it's not because when you think about it, local government is really the only government in Canada that has a wealth tax. Because if we assume that the land and the house in which you live and on which you live is it's become in this crazy world of ours where it's all commodified, it's become a place to store wealth, then we are the only level of government that actually taxes wealth. Other governments tax consumption, tax income, tax other things. We tax wealth. So, on to Sherry. Lucky for you guys, I can stop talking. I see. Oh.
Okay, well, we're gonna go through, not exactly service by service, but chunk of services by chunk of service. Because I think we should go through all 36 service in too much detail. We'll be well beyond our time frame for today, but certainly if you have any specific questions about any specific service, we will be stopping several times during the, as we go through them. So if there's something that you'd like to bring up about a specific service, then please do. We've actually been trying to work on not going through service by service because it can become quite monotonous. So we're hoping to just highlight some of the services, point out some of the things that might be anomalies or different about some of these services, or the government, or how the finance part of that is done. But again, as I mentioned, if there's anything we've glossed over that you have a specific question about, feel free to bring it up. So yeah, as I said, we're going to use the tax bill just as a way to talk about the groups of services. So we've divided it into chunks that are in that tax bill. And just from the start, you'll find that there are services in the report that you don't find on the tax bill. That's for a number of reasons. For one, there are services in there that we talk about in the report that are provided to Central Okanagan West that maybe aren't provided to the Northwest side. So anything that's not provided to the Northwest side is not in the tax bill. So we did refer to some services that are provided in other areas of the electoral area. So those aren't shown here. There are also services that are referred to in our report that aren't, the costs aren't recovered through taxes. So those don't show up on your tax bill. So that would be things like business licenses, where the cost of that entire service is recovered through the business licenses. So they don't actually need to tax you for that service, so it's not on the tax bill. There are things like effluent processing. So there's a place where when your septic tank is cleaned out, they can go and take that and have it processed at the sewage treatment plant in Lake Country. So that's a service provided by the regional district, but it's not on here because it's paid for by the tipping fees for that service.
Just wanted to, sewage that goes to Lake Country.
Yeah.
You can't find anybody, I wasn't able to find anybody that will, tend to my septic tank from West Kelowna or Kelowna, Pittsburgh, Vernon, and even the guys up Vernon usually take the sewage to Kamloops because it's cheaper to drop off even with the fuel.
Well, there you go.
Lake Country is across the lake and over those mountains.
Yeah,
So it probably couldn't be further away from this community.
fair enough. But it is a service,
Yes,
again, of the regional district, that isn't shown on your tax bill because you're not contributing taxes to it, because it's paid for by the tipping fee of those who do use it, when they're not from this community. So some of those things aren't, again, they might be referred to in our report, so if you do have questions about them, feel free to bring them up. But that might be why they're not shown on the tax bill. And the last group that's not shown on this tax bill that you will find reference to in our report, and Alan alluded to this earlier, are those services that are sort of in the umbrella of administration. So things like human resources and IT and communications, and even engineering. So those services that go into, they're not really services, but the administration that's provided by the board, and even things like having the board building or the vehicles and all those costs. And as Alan mentioned earlier, those are recovered differently and they're allocated to each of the services. So we won't find a service on here that says human resources, or we don't find a service on here that says engineering, because those services or those departments are recovered. The cost of providing those are provided individually and allocated to each of them. So that's what we won't find. But let's go through some of the things that we do find here. So we've got listed here administration. So we've referred to a number of the services under administration. Grants and aid. There are grants and aid that are provided just to the Central Okanagan West. So Central Okanagan West as an electoral area can choose to provide those grants to nonprofits or charities or causes within their own electoral area. You can see there's not a huge contribution that goes into that. It's 25 cents on an average home here, but yeah, that's a service that is just provided to Central Okanagan West. We've got board services. That is the cost of providing the service for the whole regional district board meetings, the activities of the board, supporting the board. That's the cost under that service. Electoral area administration, again, it's some of those administrative costs, but just that apply to the two electoral areas. There's not a lot of those, which is why the number on there is 47 cents. More elections, running elections is one of the services under there. Then we have some services that are Central Okanagan West administration only, so for the electoral area, and that's a lot of Wayne's time and when he's elections for Wayne and when he's attending meetings and some of his activities or booking meetings for services that just apply to Central Okanagan West. Then we have regional grants and aid. Again, that's the same sort of thing, but on a regional basis. The regional grants and aid, I think, have been used in the past to support community gardens. It should be
There was a discussion a couple of years ago, and I don't think there's a lot of regional grants and aid left.
well, I think that's the only one left that's been provided.
And we
it seems
don't,
to be a
and we
historical
don't
thing.
put into community gardens from our areas, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, the whole region actually applies to that particular grant. Going forward, that may not continue, but that's from, that figure is from 2022 and from the budget. And then the last figure that we have under there, we refer to Surveyor of Taxes. So that's something that is not actually a regional district service, but we wanted to include it on the tax bill. You wouldn't normally see it itemized on your tax bill, but every service that you do get taxed for, the Surveyor of Taxes is the province's fee that they put on top of it for the fact that they are collecting the taxes on behalf of the regional district. So for every service, there's a 5.25% markup by the surveyor. That's the fee that they're charging you for them collecting the funds for you and then distributing it to the regional district. So the figure that we show there, usually I show it at the very end. So when we get to our total tax bill, that's how we calculated that. So that's 5.25% of our total tax bill. Yeah, it is a big number. Yeah, there's been movements to try and change that number several times, but it's never, I don't know how it's ever been. Never since 5.25%.
Oh.
Ever changed. I know I've
No,
seen at UBCM, you know, there's been calls for, but anyway, it's been there for. Pardon me?
Property base, the 1.4 million spread over.
The property base that, sorry,
How many properties?
the,
Like the value of the assessment base, or?
Yeah, well, 1.44, that's collected for the region, right?
Yes, so the 1.044 billion, that's the regional assessment. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So that,
And what's that over how many properties?
oh my goodness, well,
1,605.
The northwest side, I believe, is 2,300 parcels.
yeah, so we've got northwest side about 2294 parcels. Yeah, and I think we're with a total assessment of just over $1 billion. And that would include, as Daryl mentioned, a lot of the lakefront homes there, so you're about $1 billion assessment. And so that would be raised from, that would be the base on what's all the money.
yeah, and just to go back to top, so we've referred to a property tax per, we use 635,000 as our average home. So that's actually just based on looking at the northwest side specifically, and then actually extracting, oftentimes you use the total residential assessment and the total number of parcels, but then the number is actually including vacant as well. So this is actually more just using how many homes there are and the residential assessment for non-vacant properties. So it's hopefully a more truer number, and then it's probably.
Question, you mentioned the 5.25% average for the severe taxes, that's the large amount. It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, on the average tax bill for it, it'll be at least 46.
So for administration, that's very high.
Yeah.
We get one check for the association from the regional district, it's around 15. Administrative fee.
There is, yeah, and there is, I mean, Surveyor of Taxes recovers it from every regional district across the whole entire province. So they have a much larger tax base to be, but yes, it is often argued that what they're doing for that money is maybe not worth what they're collecting, but.
Sorry.
Yeah, fair enough.
And one thing with the tax folios that we have in the area here, there's a discrepancy between sort of the number of houses and the number of folios.
Yeah.
And that's because if you have a dock on the water, you get a separate notice now for the dock.
Yeah, so there doesn't necessarily equate to, yeah.
Yeah, and then that's considered to be an improvement, I believe, too. So,
So that's sort of the group of administration services that we've run in there. So I'll finish the planning, and then again, if you have any questions on these group of services before we move to the next. But most of these services are decided on, as we touched on earlier, by the entire board. So whether it's a service that's only provided to, so Central Okanagan West grants and aid, for instance, that would still be decisions on that, would still have to be voted on by the entire board. If it's a service, if provided to one electoral area. And then you have things that are, like the forest services, again, provided to the entire region, and again, to the entire board that's making decisions. Planning and development. Depending on what I'm looking at. Planning and development, so there's the electoral area planning, and that's the planning that's provided to for providing the OCP and the zoning and the land use. That's the applications that people would make if they want to change their zoning or have a variance. That's the electoral area planning that's provided, and that's provided in both electoral areas. Whereas regional planning refers to the regional growth strategy and larger region-wide documents and transportation strategies, or housing strategies, affordable housing strategies, agriculture strategies, things that fall out of that regional growth strategy. So that's how the planning service is provided. Electoral area planning is an interesting one because, again, RDCO is quite unique in how the municipalities are involved in that service with the fringe area agreements that they have. They also pay into that service, which is, again, quite unique in RDCO. Many other regional districts have only the electoral areas would be contributing to that service, and they would be, as we touched on, having those decisions just made by electoral area directors. They would normally be making those decisions together, but RDCO has a long history of having these fringe area agreements, and indeed, like Kelowna pays almost as much as Central Okanagan West does into that electoral area planning service. So in some ways are paying to have some influence, and so they do, because they pay into the service, they also participate in the decision.
Is that one we could opt out?
No, as a matter of fact, you probably did time to speak on that. Fringe area agreements are something that I found when I got to the regional board in 2014 when I first got elected. I found that these fringe area agreements, that the two electoral areas were paying 91% of the electoral area function, and the four regional districts or the four municipalities were paying 9%. So I complained about that, and the next year, 2015, I believe, they did what they called and went all in. And each municipality paid per parcel for the lands that they wanted to have say in. Now, the agreements that they talked about, the fringe area agreements, were agreements that were drawn up by the individual municipalities using their staff, their lawyers, conducted in camera, and they got the best agreement that they could possibly come up with. And then they dropped them on the table and told me to sign it. And I asked for a second opinion from a lawyer for the electoral areas to discuss the fringe area agreements and get an opinion on our side. And it was not allowed. And so they did, they went forward and they paid full out, and Kelowna, Lake Country, Peachland, and West Kelowna all had a say in everything, right up to a variance on a garage in West Ships. In 2016, they got selected, and they only took the stuff that they wanted to take. And the only area in Central Okanagan Regional District that is not fringed is Macassa and West Ships. West Kelowna has a say up to but not including Lake Okanagan Resort. Kelowna has a say up to West Kelowna is up to but not including Macassa. Kelowna is up to but not including Lake Okanagan Resort. Lake Country fringe nothing on this side of the lake, and Peachland just took a little bit of stuff down their end. So as a consequence, Central Okanagan East pays, I believe, $37,000 for electoral area planning, and I think we paid $220,000 or something. It was a good chunk of money for electoral area planning. But what that did is if we have a variance or a zoning issue within the Northwest side, only two people vote on it, myself and the electoral area director for Central Okanagan East. But if he votes opposite to me,
the issue's defeated. So somebody who's not elected in our community, doesn't pay taxes here, doesn't know the community, can kill anything that comes through on the planning issue within our regional district. That's simple. Below us, in the areas down here, West Kelowna has a say, like in Shelters Cove, when we dealt with that issue down there. West Kelowna also had a say in that as well. So the fringe area agreements, we had no say in whatsoever, and this came down to, again, sort of the voting privilege. So we've got for there right now, that's fringe area agreements and more on voting privilege later on.
So another unique thing about electoral area planning is that there are, in terms of governance, is that there is the advisory planning commission, and I know we have at least one member that probably can speak much more eloquently about it than I will, but it is a body with community members on it. They are referred planning applications primarily, but can be referred other planning issues. But the purpose of an advisory planning commission is to provide some advice to the board on specific planning applications, particularly so they don't have to get into the same level of detail and to provide that community input.
Sorry, please, one last thing for your report. There is no APC for the other side. Only the west side has one. The one on the other side was canceled about 10 years ago.
So yeah, so that the ABC is just for Central Okanagan West, and deals with applications not just from the northwest side, but the electoral area. There is also an environmental advisory committee. I don't know, they go where I saw them on the website as one, and somewhere else. But anyway, same sort of thing, advisory on environmental issues that the board can refer environmental either applications or any issues that they would like feedback from the environmental advisory committee for as well. Building inspection, the other services we have under this grouping, building inspection, again, that's provided to the electoral areas only. So that's a service just to the electoral areas. That's just to make sure that buildings are up to BC building code. And then the transportation demand management service is really something that came out of the regional growth strategy and was a component is to provide the electoral areas. There's a component of transportation strategy that that they were working on. I think it was a traffic safety advisor. Yep.
I provide money for a traffic safety officer for the school kids in West Kelowna, even though most of our kids go to school in Burn.
They're in the Kelowna catchment area.
We were.
The schools, like everyone up to West Shore Estates.
Yes.
In the Kelowna catchment area.
Yes.
So if they go to school in Vernon, it's because they've received permission from the Vernon.
One of the
district
grandfather
to-
in there.
Yeah, but the catchment for West Shore is Kelowna.
Yeah.
So that would make sense. That we pay.
Yeah, so there is some implementation projects from the transportation plan, but yeah, the other costs in there are the.
I had a question on building inspection. Is that not a user fee service?
Primarily, so there is a component of the building inspection that is raised in permits. So that one of the ways of recovering the cost is through the building permit fees, as well as through electoral area planning also receives development application fees. But building inspection traditionally is a service that a larger chunk of it. That's kind of what's left over that they don't recover through the permits that they're recovering. Yeah. Yes, that's the portion that we referred to there in the both in the taxes and then on the right hand side of the column there, that's the property tax that would be collected just from the northwest side. Any other questions about this service grouping in particular?
Tim, I know that you're online. Do you have any questions? Have you got any comments at all? Can you hear us? No, must have gone to sleep.
Don't forget to take it off mute.
Are we on mute?
He might be.
I don't want to speak for Tim. This is David Van Owen speaking. I can hear you. Thank you for speaking up a little louder since that comment. Tim has shared the same observation with me that it was rather hard to hear. So I'm not sure if it's improved for him or not. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David. I'm trying to be loud.
So we move on then? Okay, and I'll go through these fairly quickly. We've got 3 different sets of services here, and these are services again provided to Northwest Side. So we've got some bylaw enforcement services, noise, untidy premises, insect control, weed control, and then dog control. The only one really of any, and actually none of them is really very expensive in terms of a household. The average household dog is $8, and the others are much less than that. You're paying 19 cents for insect control, so hopefully you don't have any insects. Or I get my money back. Yeah. So these are all regulatory services provided just to the, noise untidy premises, insect and weed control. Some of them are provided just to the electoral areas, but some of them have different, like insect and weed control have a different kind of sub-regional catchment with other jurisdictions, and then dog control is a fully regional service. Solid waste, and I will say that one of the things about, if we look at dog control, that as a regional service, and we just ignore it for the moment or set aside kind of perceptions on service level, but as a regional service, that is a fairly expensive service for the region to provide. And so one could say that there's a benefit for smaller jurisdictions like the Northwest Side and like the Central Northwest to participate in that, because you do get certain things that you probably wouldn't get otherwise from if you had your own dog control service. But that goes without saying for a lot of the regional services, but it would also go in other jurisdictions too. When we look at solid waste, we've got a solid waste parcel tax of $43, and that parcel tax is paid in part, I think, I believe it's not a decommissioning fee, because that's already paid for.
Yeah, that's coming in.
Thank you. Yes.
The parcel tax, so the parcel tax is the way that the electoral areas are paying towards, but all of the solid waste services. So
Our transfer station.
recycling, and transfer station operations, the whole 9 yards, and you pay through a parcel tax, whereas the city of Kelowna also pays, like they all pay for it, and they pay on top of that their user fees, right? So they pay user fees if they're getting roadside collection, or you're not getting roadside collection, so you're just paying this.
Pay for transfer station as well.
As part of this $43.
So this, comes up our taxes, but then we are in steel quarter.
Utility bill.
Okay, yes.
Yes.
This is open.
The parcel tax, if you pay user fees,
Economic development, the Central Economic Development Commission, that is a region-wide service. So again, benefiting from the whole region paying for that. Parks and Recreation, regional parks, another full regional service. So that is a relatively expensive service, because our RDCO Parks, regional park system is honestly one of the better ones in the province and one of the bigger ones in the province. And so it is consequently one of the more expensive ones in the province, and partly because land is so expensive here as well. And a portion of that goes to fund reserves to acquire more land for parklands. The Westside Community Parks, this is your local parks service, and so that is a little bit more expensive, in part because you have a smaller tax base over which to collect for this one particular service. Whereas with regional parks, it's a much larger tax base, of course, it's the entire regional district.
Regional parks does not include the country park.
No.
No.
Yeah, that's a provincial park, right?
Yeah, Victory is a provincial park. Actually, just for informational purposes, we have no regional parks within the Northwest. Closest regional park to us is Traders Cove Park down at the end of the road, and it is an $8.3 million a year function, and they took $30,000 away from us just a little while ago that was helping to pay for the curator down at Fringe Park with James Baker, and I begged him not to do that, but it's gone, so.
Wayne, the Country Park boat launch, not the Provincial Park boat launch, but the Country Park portion of the boat launch.
The regional district will launch. Yeah.
That should fall under regional park.
That would be under Westside Community Parks.
Yes.
Is it community? park?
It is, both all three of those sites down in Fringe Delta are community park sites. Two of them have been developed and one has not.
Okay, we were hired by RDCO Parks specifically to administer the restoration.
Yeah, but RDCO Parks operates both regional, Westside Parks and Eastside Parks.
Interestingly enough, so in the Metro Vancouver Regional Park System, the city of Vancouver being the largest city with the wealthiest city in terms of assessment base, it too doesn't have any regional parks in its boundaries, but it pays the most towards the regional park system. So you're kind of like the city of Vancouver.
So Fintry is our standing park.
There you go.
We
If I
use
may
it.
add, that does raise an interesting question, okay, the city of Vancouver. Yes, we receive our regional park services from the city of, or from regional district, of Central Okanagan. And I trust when we go to community outreach and community consultation, the big question is, where do you actually derive your enjoyment of those services? Are you participating in the regional parks that are in the Central Okanagan Regional District? Or are you participating in parks that are outside of the Central Okanagan Regional District? And are we making the appropriate contributions to those parks that we are or not?
Yes. No, it's a very good point. And regional parks, and for that matter, local parks, have traditionally been viewed as, but let's focus on regional parks, traditionally been viewed as having kind of intrinsic value. You protect sensitive ecosystems and the very fact that they exist, whether they're kind of inside your border of the jurisdiction or in Westfield or next door, what have you, benefits the entire region. And so that's why they tend to be paid for by property taxes on that, and they tend to be paid for on the funding gets allocated on the basis of assessment only. Increasingly though, there is now an argument, and we're hearing this here, is that it's a legitimate argument, is that in fact, regional parks kind of have a dual benefit. They have an indirect benefit, which is that intrinsic public good benefit. We all benefit just by virtue of the fact of protecting nature and cleaning it and all of the ecosystem services that go with that. But there's also a direct benefit that accrues to people who use the park. And so we're starting to see now a little bit of a shift, not a lot of places, but a bit of a shift on Vancouver Island in particular, where we're starting to see the cost of the regional park systems allocated on a shared basis of assessment and population. Population being kind of a proxy for usage, because we can't limit use of the parks. Anybody can walk into a park no matter where it is. And we don't typically kind of, ask people at a park where they're from and write it down and keep a database and all that. So we just say simply, rather than trying to measure usage, we use a proxy figure, which is population. My point is, though, we're starting to recognize in how we pay for these, both the intrinsic public good value and the direct benefit value of those things in the park. And so if that philosophy were, and I'm not saying it should be, but if that philosophy were adopted by our CEO, we would see a change in some of this.
Just on your services there, on the library portion.
Yes.
Should probably mention that we do have a small community library here.
Oh, yes.
And it's Okanagan Regional Library, $2,000 a year provides to them to get material for the library. And so we have a connection with Okanagan Regional Library, but we're not an official branch sort of thing.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think that.
Okay. And as you would know, Wayne, the Okanagan Regional Library System is one that transcends RDCO. It goes
29
goes from the borough, from the border to the Alberta border, I think, and way up north. So it's a big system.
29 different communities, so it's quite a large library services.
Yes, and we made, it's a good chunk of money there too. Yes.
And just so that people don't misunderstand, I'm not opposed to regional parks. It's just that we have
none in our area, and we've done such a good job of the West Shores and Killiney Beach Park that I really can see the money being spent in the area here and the improvements that are coming to our community parks, and that's what I like to see, because they never looked as good as they do now.
Excellent. Well, we'll pass that on to our RDCO.
I have told them many times that that park has never looked that good.
Hey, Wayne said something good about the region. Woo! Okay. All right, mark that down in the minutes. Yeah.
Credit where credit's due.
All right, that deals with those ones there. Any questions on these particular items or these services? Okay. Is this you? Okay.
So these are, the top ones are environmental services, so open occupation water board, again, that's not so much a service of the regional district, it's cooperation between RDCO, RDOS, and RDNO, so the whole basin pays into it, and the open occupation water board actually has their own taxation authority. So they provide services that kind of look at the whole basin and the protection of the watershed and water quality issues. So we all participate in that. Air quality is a service that's provided to basically the whole region. Actually, I think it's this country that's not part of that service. It's actually a sub-regional service, but then they pay into it through a service agreement.
Excuse me, sorry, I just saw something that I forgot back on parks. If you go to figure 3.4 on page 44, where it says Westside Municipal Recreation.
Yeah, there's a typo there. So,
Yeah, it's got $148,000 we covered for Westside.
no, where that should be zero.
It should be
Yeah,
zero.
that was my fault. I made that table and I didn't notice that. I was hoping. you would-
Okay. All right, so that is zero.
Yes.
Yes,
All right, then we go back to air quality then.
All right.
Okay. And we do like to sprinkle in a few typos just to make sure.
Yes.
I got a spelling correction somewhere on.
Oh, and I have another one that's actually in this, not this particular slide, but it's in the table, so, whoever knows it first, yes. Free bottle of water, yeah. So air quality is actually, set up as a sub-regional service, but everyone does participate in one way or the other, and again, that's mostly, community awareness, there are programs, burning restrictions, things like that. Sterile insect release, again, that's another service that's actually a cooperation between several regional districts. I think it's 4, so it's the same RDOS, RDCO, RDNO, and CHR. Yeah, so that's mostly protecting orchards and fruit growers from toddling moth, I believe it is. So there's a portion of that service that's recovered through everyone paying into it. And then a portion of it's paid for as a personal tax if you actually have an orchard and you're a grower and you pay a regular basis based on land that's benefiting from that service. Emergency services, so that's a fairly large group of services through the regional district. You have regional rescue, which is kind of an all-encompassing service that talks about emergency services as well as in the electoral areas, but the municipalities also participate in that. That also includes things like how you contribute to your search and rescue. So it's a fairly large group of services. Emergency management is just something that's been delegated from the RDCO to what's called the EMO, so the Emergency Management Organization. It's all the CAOs basically of all the jurisdictions, and they're delegated authority to make decisions on emergency management issues and declaring an emergency, that type of thing. Victim services, that's provided in concert with the RCMP. 911 emergency call is basically just providing that, making sure that we all have the ability to call 911 for emergencies. That's provided again across the whole region. Services contracted through ECOM that does the contracts for most of the regional districts in the province. And then there's some dispatch services that are provided more locally. Crime Stalkers is together with the Crime Stalkers Association and Crime Prevention funds a crime prevention officer. Everyone participates in that service except for Kelowna, who has their own crime prevention officer. Electoral area fire, so that's sort of both electoral areas, and it sort of covers, it's sort of the umbrella service that helps to administer the separate fire services. So there's sort of an overarching administration function for the electoral area fire. And then, of course, Northwest Side Fire Protection is the fire service that applies to this particular area. I probably actually later was thinking that on our tax notice, we have sort of the services that are provided to all of Northwest Side, and then we have more local services. So Northwest Side Fire Protection is a local area service, but we've listed it here because it's provided to all of the area guards that it applies. And you'll see it is fire services. Fire protection is always a high cost figure. So for all communities that are, especially if we've done a few studies where areas are looking at having fire protection service, and so also look at the number, it's always a costly area. So, you know, it's no different on this tax notice, but just to assure you that that is not unusual at all, and in fact, that's quite a bit cheaper than many of the communities that we see.
Can I just address that, Wayne Carson, just so that you know what comes with that as an advantage is your property insurance. If you look at your property insurance, you're probably getting about a 60–65% discount between the water and the fire department on your home insurance. So you get money back for that because it is a huge cost. I'm used to explaining that. I've been explaining that for years.
Yes, the insurance cost for people who have no fire protection is it's prohibitive. Sometimes people find that they can't even get insurance. So, and so that $930 at the bottom that we've circled there, that's where that's applying that 5.25%. That's where that $46 of the surveyor tax. So that's calculated on that number. Even though as we go forward and talk about the specific, like the water services or other specific services, those, that 5.25 would also be calculated on those, but not everyone. Any questions or concerns about some of these services? And, sorry, yeah.
It's Katie Simpson. So we're contributing to the crime prevention coordinator who meets with our state team to talk about this. So I'm just curious, do they meet with addressing other functional that service us?
I would note that. That's a good question. Yes.
Last time I asked, they did not.
Yeah, I think we'd be out of the Columbia discussion. Yes, very good question. Services. No. Unless you're in the lower part of the cutoff, I think it's just.
At the new section.
Thank you. Yeah. So on this, so
these are the services that are only provided to portions of even of the Northwest Side. So the Killiney Beach Community Hall. If any one of you can tell me which fire hall, the Ridgeview Fire Hall,
I can.
that would be great, because I've asked her this a couple of times and I have
The Ridgeview used to be what was Lacassa.
Okay.
And it was an RV park at the time, and they were outside of our fire protection district. And they chose to join the fire protection district, and there is what they call gifting at that time. So that you pay a lump sum of money, usually per parcel, to join the fire protection district to catch you up with everybody else in the community that's been paying for it for years. I believe it was $212,000. So there was, I believe, municipal finance made a loan to pay the regional district that money. And then they put it on their taxes and they have to pay until 2025, I think it is.
to repay that, but that was what it cost them to join the Northwest Side Fire Protection District. At the time, they were going to build a fire hall. There was an offer to build a fire hall right at Ridgeview. That's why it's called the Ridgeview Hall. But due to the zoning and the fact that it was seasonal, we need the fire hall somewhere where we were a little bit closer to our manpower. So, but
Perfect, so that-
that's the story.
Okay, applies to 500 parcels, so that makes perfect sense.
500 parcels is with the capacity.
Yeah, so, and that will retire.
Where was that fire hall? Where that?
There was no fire hall.
There wasn't.
They gave us the money and we got the land and through a different deal. BC Parks and Highways and Fire Department came together, made a deal for the chunk of land where the Shorts Creek Hall is now. And then the community built the fire hall, which allowed us enough money left over from the gift that they gave us from Ridgeview to put up a real huge down payment on the next truck that we bought.
And then we've got the Fringe water parcel tax. Again, different water systems will use different ways of paying for it. So most places have a user fee. There's a basic user fee. There's an asset renewal fee, and then there's consumption based. So depending on how much water you use, you pay a certain rate. Fringe water also has a parcel tax. So it looks like they're paying way more, but it just they're recovering the same amount of funds from different sources.
Did you get the explanation for
Why
that?
why it's a parcel tax?
Yeah. Again, it was a deal that they made with regional districts and residents at the time, and they charged, I think it was $1,700 per property up there at the time to bring in the water source. $17,000, excuse me, to bring in the water, and they were offered the option of paying it up front, getting a bank loan, or putting it on your taxes. And this is, I think, what went on the taxes.
Which is again a fairly common approach because it's always a big ticket item when you bring in water or sewer or other utilities. So paying it over time is usually more acceptable.
I'm sorry, just one more thing. The Fintry that you list up there should be listed as the upper Fintry because there is a Fintry water system
That's not.
that is a
provided by
private
the
water
state.
system. So just for clarification, it should be Valley Sun Upper Fintry water system.
And then there's again a water system at Killiney Beach. And if anyone notices, that's where my typo of the day is. It's a water user fee. They don't like to have a fee.
And also Fringe water parcel.
Oh, yeah, the two of them. Oh, on the same page. Awesome. Thank you.
And on the next page, 50, under peak detection, I think it's leak detection. I've never heard of a peak detection before.
And then West Shore Estates is the next water system. So two of those water systems still need some upgrades to meet the water drinking protection guidelines. And I think that's the Killiney and West Shore still need other improvements to meet the guidelines. But Killiney, both those systems do, and Fintry, the upper Fintry system does not currently.
So Killiney and West Shores are looking at multi-million-dollar under the current plan. If we don't continue with the deferments, we're looking at multi-million-dollar capital projects.
And that's for interior health.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, it's interior health, yes.
Question on that, improvements. Improvement fees that we're paying for our water.
Asset renewal.
Asset renewal.
Yes.
Started, how many years ago?
It used to be called capital reserve. Capital reserve, but we never seem to be able to keep any money in capital reserve.
Well, there's the beginning. It's supposed to be a lump sum raised to replace all of the infrastructure in Killiney Beach, and there was a maximum that we were going to pay or we could pay out after so many years. I don't know what happened.
Well, Killiney Beach has still got some problems. We did $3 million worth of upgrades to the Killiney Beach water system a few years ago. It still needs about $7 million in infrastructural upgrades. And then we're looking at, well, the placeholder number that they gave me for filtration at the moment was $4.6 million.
And over and above what you.
Over and above the $7 million of infrastructure upgrades that are still needed to the system. So, some major costs coming down the line for us. And we have to also extend the intake pipe, both Killiney Beach and West Shores. And we are at a very shallow portion of the lake. We got to go out almost a kilometer to get into 80 feet of water.
Point of clarification, I thought that capital replacement costs were separated from operational costs by law, by provincial law, and they had to be maintained. So we should be able to get an actual number of what's in the capital reserve fund. Because that should not be touched for operations at all. I agree. So perhaps we can find those numbers out.
Yeah, and they do have, the capital reserve is separate from the operation. So they do have the operation, but they can, raise funds towards, so you might not see, and that's probably what the asset renewal fee is. And I haven't sort of looked at what I do have the figures for what each of the reserves are, so the capital reserves, the operational reserves, and I think water has one of those. I put in this one.
You got consumption basis.
But yeah, you can raise funds toward those things,
Yeah.
and so I don't,
But there are actual numbers you can
Yes,
access.
yeah.
Sometime in the past.
Okay, yeah, we can refer, but the,
Thank you. It was going
Tell you
in
what,
West
yeah.
Shores. Appreciate it.
And so one of the things when we look at the water systems here, and it's been said already, but it's important, I think, is that all of the stuff we're talking about, water systems, because they are very kind of the utility systems with the set user groups that are attached to the systems or at least benefit from the systems. And the issues with respect to water quality and standards, meeting current standards, all of those things would exist for the systems irrespective of whichever regional district you're in. So, okay.
and yes, and just to highlight, we can point out that, yes, the only people paying towards those services are the people that are in that service area and that are hooked up to that.
Yeah, the only question in my mind is what kind of balance do the RDCO take on in terms of federal and other provincial grants for water systems? How active are you fighting for a very response?
Yeah, no, that's a legitimate question. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, and I suppose it's probably subjective anyway. But you're quite right. There is. You want your local government to advocate for sure.
We had 4 years ago, we had a $2.9 million federal grant for the work that was done in Killiney Beach. And in West Shores, when the reservoirs were replaced, we used $870,000 in gas tax money to offset a $1.3 million project over there. So there is some money out there, but it's going to be tough to get because federal government, I kind of blew the water over the last couple of years here. I don't think there's going to be a lot of money out there for infrastructure stuff right now. I think grants are going to be really tough to find for this sort of thing going forward. It's just because of the financial state that we're in now.
Yeah. And also, yeah, there are regional district advocates, UBCM advocates, others do, but Wayne's quite right, is that things are getting tight. And unless you have a pipeline with oil, then there's just not a lot of money for it.
I have something just about, sorry, can I move back from water, back to, I was just looking after, crime prevention. I don't know who brought that up. So I just quickly had a look at it. It might be something that should maybe be included in the report if information's ever, like, it's a small line item. I think it's $3.75 per person, but I just went on the RDCO's website, and what's interesting is I know we have Block Watch here, I think, because I've heard someone talking about Block Watch. We have a pretend Block Watch coordinator. Well, okay. So, but Yeah, I was gonna say, but anyways, I was just looking at a lot of the programs that they offer, and, like Citizens Patrol, which all falls under this prime prevention coordinator. It's Lake Country, West Kelowna, and Peachland only. There's no community police officers that are here. They're in Kelowna. Their seniors contact program, which I never heard of this actually. Which actually is good for this senior community that we have. It doesn't function in this area at all. And so my question would be is, if you were to say we need to have block watch, who would administer it? VNOD or West Kelowna? Or sorry, Vernon North Okanagan Detachment.
Yeah.
So, and then if it turns out that it would be administered through Vernon North Okanagan Detachment, because they are who responds to this area, then that just goes to support everyone who seems to think we should. To North Regional North. See, I'm helping your cause. I'm trying to. But anyways, there's a whole list of them. None of them, except for graffiti removal, none of them are for this area.
Okay.
I think that what happens there is if you look, you'll see that we pay for Crime Stoppers in these functions through our regional district, and we're not paying for it through North. So I don't know if we would get that service out of North because we're not paying for it.
No, but that's what I guess the question would be, is that if there's no community, if we're policed by Vernon North Okanagan, one would assume that all our crime prevention services would come from them, but that isn't how it works. So it's just another example of a disconnect.
If we're unable to receive the service, why do we?
Yeah. Yeah. I want my Starbucks for
Yeah.
$2.75.
Well, you can have service.
So residential, this is another question.
Brian Cole here, just in keeping with the Crime Stoppers and crime prevention. It looks like we're spending as much on Crime Stoppers and crime prevention as we are on the sterile insect release program. And given the prevailing land use in the Northwest side, is this an expense we should be retaining or coming out of?
Sterile insect is one of those things that benefited balance sort of thing, because it was affecting the agricultural end of that. So it's sort of like, what was it, starlings, right? You know, they had the thing to get to starlings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, so some communities saw the starlings as an invasive species and needed to get rid of them. And other areas thought, well, not bothering me.
It's considerable expense considering the agricultural relevancy this way. I mean, like I said, it's almost as much as we're spending on Crime Stoppers and crime prevention combined. So, yeah, it's interesting to actually see the numbers and just slowly get into the meat and potatoes of all this, levels of the details.
Well, for sure, and I'm really glad you mentioned that, Brian, because that's really the purpose of bringing all this to the community, to do this, on behalf of the community, to do this dive into these things. Interestingly, sterile insect release, I do a lot of work with SIR. It's an amazing program. That said, sorry? Well, I know, I was gonna say, that said, there are 4 regional districts that are members, and RDCO is the only regional district that has full membership of all its jurisdictions. So if we go to NORD, if we go to RDOS, and we go to CSRD, it's only areas that have orchards that are jurisdictions that
They mentioned that Kelowna and West Kelowna both opted out of that.
of SIR?
Yeah.
Nope, no, they're in it.
I don't think
So
so.
is that not particularly on the?
I don't think so.
Brad Stevens is still representative.
Yeah, no, every jurisdiction in RDCO is a member of SIR. But,
Look at that again, but yeah.
but there are in other regional districts, it's just a select group of, it's more of an opt-in, opt-out.
It has been a very successful program.
It has been.
That's what we have been told.
Well, one of the things too, that one of the reasons that there is full participation, and indeed RDCO is pushing for full participation in other regional districts, is because not only does it benefit directly the orchards, or people who have fruit trees in backyards, but it also, it does benefit everybody because, and then they've actually quantified this, the hundreds of thousands of liters of nasty pesticides that haven't entered Oakland as a result of all this stuff.
And if you cast your memory back to when the moths were actually here, it was unbelievable.
But it's a totally valid point you raised though, that it's, yeah.
And they do have, you know, those two ways of raising the funds. One specifically the parcel tax that you pay if you have the orchard. So there is that mechanism there that, you know, they could always adjust how they're recovering, right? So they're recovering
It
from-
looks substantial compared to the other services and payments we're allocating for those services.
Yeah.
No, very good point. Let's just close this off by looking at the provincial services and the other agencies. All of these costs on here, you pay if you're in British Columbia, irrespective of kind of what regional district or whether you're elected or electoral area or municipality, but we've got well, actually, that's not true, because our police tax is for electoral areas. So we're paying about $42 for a representative home here for policing, and that's a provincial tax. It's not through the RDCO, it's a provincial tax that comes directly to you from the province. It's the same for electoral areas in all regional districts. The rural tax for roads and subdivision, again, that's the same tax in all unincorporated jurisdictions. So you're paying about $286 a year for your roads. And that's from Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. And then your school tax, again, you pay irrespective of where you are. And so you're paying for a place that has a lot of old people, you're paying a lot for school. And beats listeners, obviously.
Sorry, I was just gonna jump in and say, so we used the 2021 rates here because the province is literally just coming out with their updated tax rates for 2022, which I just received yesterday. So I am happy to say that almost all of those rates are slightly lower now. So what we've used here was the 2021 rates, but have applied the average house value from 2022. So the provincial total, instead of there, well, thank you, is actually $1,000.06, or sorry, $1,000.06. And then the total at the bottom instead of 192 is 155.
Okay.
So we will update the rate.
So the police tax went down?
The police tax went down, but it's just the tax rate that went down.
no,
It's because
yeah.
the assessed values, generally speaking, over the province have gone up, so I'm sure they're not recovering less money. Yeah.
But it kind of some people have won and some
Yes,
people have lost.
exactly, yeah, they're.
And then when we look at the other agencies for Northwest Side, the Central Oklahoma Hospital District, so every regional district raises money for hospital capital. So again, RDCO does it, RDNO does it, every regional district does it. It's not an insubstantial amount, as you can see. Municipal Finance Authority, that is kind of an anomaly we won't bother getting into, but you pay 13 cents a year on that. And then you pay $26 a year to the government to tell you how much your place is worth. So that's good too. So.
No, it wasn't good this year.
So sizable.
Now, let me, Mr. Chair, I wonder if I can just kind of pose a question to the group. Give me some takeaways from all this stuff. As you look through all of this, and as you listen to this, and we get into it, and as Brian said, we dig into it a little bit, what are some takeaways that you have? There are.
The police costs, hospital costs are, police costs for most of the Norfolk.
Yeah.
That we're paying is separate.
Well, and in fact, you're being the province, but the services are coming.
The services are coming.
Yes.
I personally would like to see my money go, my tax dollars go to where I
Yeah.
and help the community,
Yeah.
because I know they could use the influx of capital there.
Yes, yes, for sure. Yes, Dwayne.
In your opinion, do you have a better deal if we're court versus court? Do we get better services?
I don't think so. I don't think
Is
answer
that
that
what
question.
I
I don't know. Quite frankly, I think that's probably,
Do we have better
come down
options?
the pipe later, but
So, well,
possibly.
yeah, possibly. So let me put it this way. One takeaway for me as I look at all this stuff is you've got 36 services. There's a kind of a certain amount of complexity there. Every service has to be created separately, managed separately, funded separately, accounted for separately, all that kind of stuff. if you went to a different regional district, you'd have 36 services, you might have more services, because in RDNO, you've got kind of more electoral areas, so they tend to kind of have a different package of services. So would you be better or worse off? It's kind of in the eye of the beholder to some degree. Maybe you pay a little more, maybe you pay a little less, maybe you wouldn't get the same suite of services, maybe you get some great services that you don't have right now. It's hard to say, and that would be, as Daryl said, that would be the focus of an additional study where you dive into all of that stuff with our DNO as well.
And yes, and I appreciate that. And you're way more knowledgeable than I got to thank you for access to information, Josh. And we've never, I've never got information like this in 20 or 30 years. Wayne's asked for it.
I've asked.
Everybody's asked for it. I mean, wow, you've got the keys to the kingdom. And, you know, this is enlightening. I like it. And, wonderful. You know, maybe we're getting the best deal we can possibly get right now, maybe we're not. But it'd be nice to ask the question. Could we, is the grass greener on the other side of the fence?
Well, and keep in mind too, and I know Brian, you got your hand up as well, but I think the other thing to consider as well is that, and I know we're kind of speculating and jumping ahead, but if that were an option that the committee wanted to look at and recommend that going forward, then you still need to have a willing partner on the other side. and RDNO would want to be, we want to really understand, well, what are the implications for us of having a new service join that has its own costs, has its own challenges, has its own opportunities as well. So there would be all of that to look into, but that's why we do those detailed studies. But I think maybe the point you gave, which is really good, is that before we can even anticipate any of that stuff, we need to know all the details of what is today. So that's great that we've got that.
Well, and there's some stuff that's fixed cost.
Yes.
And there's the variable stuff. And like you say, the variable stuff, I don't see a lot of. I think we can part of the variable stuff. I can stand correct about the opinions here, but well, this is I don't think we can afford to have our own municipality. We have no commercial, we have no industrial.
And our growth is up.
Well, remember when we had the meeting at Lake Oakland Resort and the first mayor, West Kelowna, asked if we want to be included in West Kelowna? You at that meeting?
That's a few years ago.
And, you know, I said, we've got limited, you know, potential for industrial and commercial. We don't have very much future growth in residential development. Why do we want to be part of West Kelowna? And that's when they dropped us, because there was no benefit to having it. You know, what are we going to provide? We're basically a cost back then. And so, you know, we might be better off where we are right now too.
It's a legitimate question for sure. Yes. Brian, I didn't have.
Sure. We've been fortunate to be involved in planning circles in 3 provinces and all the territories, all 3. Communities share specific values, land use, resource use, service matters, and they're constantly evolving. And tonight, I think it's really important to start digesting some of this, but also the resulting discussion that emerges out of this is really important. Voting structure is key, the weighting of the structure. And when the voting structure fails to work over Golden area, you change it. Right? Nothing's written in stone. And this whole process is designed to examine these questions. You know, be it working internally with our CO, or if it doesn't work for us, we can assign. Yeah. And it's, I think, the duty of community function to optimize the representation and empowerment for its members. And so we're going through this process. This is good, where we want to be.
It's a good process. I'm still wondering, can we not invite or invite someone from Central, from North to discuss the potential?
I don't think, I understand where you're talking about, Mr. Chair. I understand the intention and the sentiment. I don't think that if I were Nord, I would say, you know what, I'm not able to come down and offer much because I couldn't possibly give an opinion without without seeing the deep dive numbers, without seeing what it meant for us. I may, when the time comes, say, we're willing to look at it with you, but you need to go through your process first and determine that that's even something that you want to get to without, and that is something that you can't, or the issues that you hear from the community can't be dealt with the administration. Then we can kind of come in and talk about the next study. I just don't think that, I don't think they would be willing to come down here. Well, if I were to pursue that, I'd be very reluctant to interfere in this process at this point. Or participate, yes. Yes. Participate, yes. Yeah, that's a better way of putting it, yes. I wonder if I could just, and I know you have your hand up, but I wonder if I could just kind of comment on just one point that Brian raised, which I think really bears underscoring because it was very important. And that is that, and I'm kind of paraphrase a little bit here, but some of the issues, as we go through all of these different services and we look at the individual services and we look also at kind of the voting implications and the rules, and we think about the cost implications and all those things. Some of the issues we may hear from the committee and some of the issues we may hear from the community may be service specific. Other issues may be more structural. Other issues may be about the voting system. As Brian mentioned, some of the concerns about how do we allocate power and who gets to say in what happens in a particular jurisdiction, in the case like Westside. That's more of a structural kind of broader issue that that may arise in our discussions, and we're hearing that this evening. We may hear that from the community. So whether we are dealing with issues or whether we hear issues that are service specific or broader kind of structural issues, what we hear will inform a little bit the kinds of solutions, the changes that we look for. And that's going to be really important to kind of listen to as we talk with the community and kind of parse that feedback and really kind of distill that down and understand. Are they concerned simply with, we don't like the park, change the park? Or is it, boy, we don't like the fact that Kelowna and West Kelowna get a vote on our plan. That's a totally different kettle of fish, and there's different implications there. So that'll be very important for us to be aware of as we go through this.
Wayne Carson. I guess just first for Wayne, if somebody from West Kelowna told you that that they were in any way at all interested in including us in the incorporation of this way, they were not being truthful with you. They would have had to have picked up the policing and the road costs all the way out here, and that would kill that right off the bat. Finley? Yeah, no.
Yeah, so you think the pitch, have us include West Kelowna?
Yeah, no, I don't think that was a genuine one.
Any of us wanted to join West Kelowna.
No, it would have cost us so much money, or it would have cost them so much money for the policing and the roads that they would have had to have taken on if we were part of that, and that would have been everything all the way out here. So, yeah, I don't think that was.
I'm not turning that out as.
Oh, no.
Oh, this is that was the history.
Yeah.
How we sort of got pushed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I believe that what we were offered to this as a committee was three options. It was either status quo, incorporation, or they moved the electoral area boundary. So that's what we're looking at as a committee. And whatever this committee decides moving forward, they would take it to the regional board. And if we decide we want to look into the move of the electoral area boundary, then that is what the next study will entail. And I believe that at that point, probably Nord would have to be involved because it's going to affect them as much as it's going to affect us. And it would also include the rest of the electoral area here because it's going to affect them as well. So that's down the road, and that's for this committee to figure out. What I wanted to explain is the stakeholder role, because this is one of the biggest irritants that I find at the regional district. Okay, just talking about the water systems, we have 6 regional district electoral area water systems. 4 are on this side, 2 are on the other side. They're all run by the regional district. They're all run by basically the same set of rules and principles, and the same organization runs them all. But because they're separate bylaws, they consider them to be one director representing Killiney Beach. And I have put forward to the board that I believe there's 2 directors representing 6 water systems, not 1 director representing 1 water system. And it's the same with the fire departments. It's 2 directors representing 4 fire departments, not 1 director representing 1 fire department. And I believe that the 2 electoral area directors should be the ones making the decisions on, in particular, the fire department, the water systems, the fringe area agreements, change planning. But on those 2 services, we're the ones that are putting the money in. We're the ones that those services provide to. So when the last time it came before the water rates, there had been a series of years where there had been losses. Those losses had been made up with, I believe, money from capital reserves. I had talked to the chair at the time. So I wasn't happy with that. But I asked for, at the time that the water rates came before the board, I asked to have the deficits and the operational losses looked into and addressed, or I would not vote for the water rate increase. And the other director from the other side of the lake supported me on that, and the rest of the board just put the water rates up. And I don't think that was fair. And it's the same thing with the fire department. We've got serious problems with the fire department, and we're not able to deal with it at all. It is strictly out of our hands. Somebody else is dealing with it. When it comes to the board, the entire board is going to get to vote on this, on anything that happens there. They're dying into those services. They don't receive any of those services to their own homes. And several times in here, it talks about, you know, participating in the service. They do not participate in the services. Every service that I know of that regional district, except for fire prevention, the entire board needs to vote on. I asked for a legal opinion on behalf of the electoral areas on voting privileges, and I did not get it. So that is one of my major problems.
Is there going to be old notes, presentation for the residents? So
Yes.
They understand that.
Perfect segue.
Yeah.
Yes, that's thank you, Wade, for that overview. I did want to say that there are some cases, other regional districts that have done what you're suggesting in terms of amalgamating those into services so that you can have that stakeholder vote. And that would be an example of a change we can take within the structure to address issues. So just as an aside.
Before we continue.
Yes.
I think we have to have a motion to adopt the current report with modification.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
If someone would like to. Wade.
With the changes that you
And
want.
Josh.
Well, we got another one, wait.
Well, we were going to say, actually, if we would love if people wanted to email them to us as well, we'll make sure to kind of get those in.
I actually have a question that maybe these guys can answer. Does anyone know if you call the ambulance or if someone has a crash on the road, where does it come from? Vernon? Always Vernon? That's funny
Not
because
always.
Kelowna's closer, so, Vernon?
What has happened in the past is normally your ambulance is dispatched to a ambulance. So they will pick an ambulance that is closest, most available. Usually that is Vernon, but it can be Armstrong. We've had ambulances here from Lumby before. And they can come from the other direction. Usually if something happens to Casa or South, the ambulance will quite often come from the other side, as well as the RCMP sometimes.
I just think it would be interesting to understand that when it comes to what regional district we like is better is how does ambulance service, how do they determine if they could choose who they send those emergency services or where they send it from, how do they make that choice? So just because I did the thing and it's 35 kilometers south to the closest Kelowna fire or ambulance, and it's 45 to the closest one in Burton. So just for the sake of understanding.
They're also.
Probably availability, but it'd be nice to clarify that in the report that that's how it works. Because there's a lot of different people. who
Absolutely.
Talk like they know what they're talking about, and sometimes they don't.
Well, I've had a Lumby ambulance come out here, they take the patient to Vernon, then they end up transporting to Kelowna, and then they end up in Grand Forks. And that is because you've got the dispatch out of Kamloops, they just grab the available car and send it to the closest call.
Anyway.
That was number one on my list here for discussions next. Yes,
You
it
and I
was.
are sharing things, right?
Ambulance service, fire response, first one. But where I was going to then go next is evolving on that. Are we looking at making an amendment to this report as it is right now to have a discussion with respect to where provincial services are being distributed, specifically the ambulance? Or are we going to be waiting to have community input to see where they're receiving their services?
Well, we can kind of lay out the information as we discover it through research, as we can investigate it and lay out what we receive. And then we can do both. We can change that and then test it on folks. And does the lived experience meet kind of what we're hearing from the authorities? You know what I mean?
The interim report officer, the resolution could read something like, they received the draft interim report as amended for receipt. It's a draft interim report, so the final report will not absorb the recommendations after tonight. But there are open houses which the people go into, and the final report coming to us. So that's how it happened, Mr. Chair, at the resolution.
We need to vote.
If the mover and the seconder is okay with that, you
Yes.
call the question.
Thanks.
Can our committee in the process be altered should our area director choose not to run, or I mean, I can speak to this, so we know each committee is. So, upward. So this committee's term, even if it will end in October, then once the new, elections are held. Chair of the board. So Corona could.
Well,
No, if I may provide some additional clarity. So this is not a standing or select committee of the board. It's more of a task force. So inclusive within your terms of reference, the committee ceases upon receipt of the final report to the regional district board, which is currently scheduled for September 26th. This year. So this committee will cease to exist on that final submission of the report that will be vetted through this committee first and then provided to them.
and the report goes to the province at the same time.
Correct.
Do you want to? Mr. Chair?
I think we have a motion. We're gonna have a vote.
Can you repeat for us the motion, something?
That.
As amended.
I so motion again.
So you, yes,
I
you second.
our expert advice.
Mr. Chair, if I may, the appropriate and next step would be to call the question and ask for a vote in favor or any opposed. And then we can track.
Vote in favor or of accepting this.
Check your online. Check your online.
Check it on.
Is everybody opposing?
Who's opposing?
Tim?
I'm sorry, I have no idea what you've been talking about. I can't hear a thing.
Oh, we can't hear a thing, okay.
So I'll have to, I'll just abstain from the vote.
So you do have a quorum, Mr. Chair, and you do have a majority. Board procedure bylaw, unfortunately, allows for electronic participation, but should the member participating online not be heard or counted, the meeting needs to continue. So we do have a vote currently.
Could you just speak up and then tell them what's happened there?
So, Tim, it's Alan Nielsen here, and I'm gonna paraphrase things. The committee is voting on whether to, is voting in support or voting for the motion of receiving the report as amended, presented by the consultants, amended by the committee, receiving that to allow the report to get completed, and then we'll take that forward as part of the public materials.
We try our best for information.
Yes.
That's been attempted.
Mr. Chair, I know we're behind time here, but should I just go through the last?
Let's continue.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And we wanted to kind of get this in front of board because time is ticking and we've got open houses coming up 3 weeks from now. So we've got 3 different times in June. We picked different days of the week in each week in the hopes that we would better capture people who maybe couldn't go on one day every week. So we've got Tuesday, June 7th, Monday, June 13th, and Wednesday, June 22nd. I confirmed, yeah, go ahead, Sandy. Yes, all the dates will be here. So generally what we will do then is have kind of theater style seating around the outside of the room. We'll have some poster boards with some materials set up there. People will be encouraged to come and kind of spend an hour self-study, talking with their neighbors, talking with committee members, talking with the consultants, understanding things. There'll be some handouts for people as well. And I'll come to the overview in a second there, Killiney mentioned a moment ago. But, and then we'll have a presentation, which usually the consultants give, and then a question and answer period facilitated by the chair afterwards. And I saw that big screen up there. Does that work? Okay, maybe that might be not a bad thing to have for that night, because it's probably a little bit bigger, and then we can also get a better layout too. Okay. But I'll work with Sandy with the folks who run the hall here, and we'll kind of get everything laid out properly. Have you heard? I think it was in the proposal. I think we usually have it from like 6 to 8:30 kind of thing. Same time as this meeting. Yeah.
We had one for May 26th.
That one, we shifted that one backwards because we wanted to make sure that the committee had time to go through this report properly. So we just made a little bit of a switcheroo, kind of push it all on back. The other thing I was going to say too, then we'll advertise the open houses after this evening. We'll advertise those. So we're good 3 weeks out. So it's lots of time still. We'll advertise it regularly for social media. We'll put it on the website and advertise it there. I'm hoping we can get an email through the WCA as well, and we'll also have them listed in the overview booklet, which I'm going to come to in just a second here. So, are there other ways to advertise it that folks can think of that we should be thinking about? For we've got social media, we've got email lists, we've got the website,
Posters that are bus stops and then the gas store.
Okay, so maybe if we provide some posters,
Probably, I think you're looking at dozen to 15
Okay.
posters throughout the area. Best if they're at least half of them are laminated.
okay. So we'll look for those then.
Vernon Morning Star,
Sorry, big pardon?
Vernon Morning Star newspaper.
Vernon Morning Star.
Should be,
Okay.
usually that's, that's usually covered by the regional.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did.
We learned that one a long time.
Good to
What's
know.
our little newspaper called? That one that comes in Tuesday? Oh,
Last edition of the Westside Post, unfortunately.
like last ever?
Oh, shoot.
Yes.
Okay.
She sold her house.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Boy, that's telling. Vernon Morning Star. That's quite. That's. I mean, that is like you were here. It's very apropos.
No, it is an issue.
It is
For
an
a
issue.
while, it was an issue where things would happen.
Yes.
Well, we published in the Kelowna
Right.
Courier,
Yeah.
not necessarily published in the
Yes.
Star.
Yes.
So it was a
Right.
lack of
Yes. Okay.
communication.
I think the call,
Not the Courier, the other one.
The west side of the Capital News.
Capital News, I think they're affiliated with Morning Star.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, overview booklet. So what we will do, what we would like to do, and what we're intending to do, kind of as per Haley's statement, are we gonna have a closed notes version of this? And the answer is yes. And we're going to put together next week, we're gonna put together, it'll be probably about a 6 to 8 page, very easy to follow kind of information package, capturing the key points, talking about the process that the study we're involved in right now. Just give folks a chance to kind of digest it very quickly, advertise the open houses. What we would like to do is get a draft and distribute it to the committee as a whole, and how about look at it, and then let us know through Sandy at the regional district. If we are able, we'll copy the chair on all these things, so he's in the loop as well. But if we can just get a sense as to, are you comfortable with it? Do you see anything glaring, that kind of stuff? I think if possible, we'll do that kind of email review rather than bring the whole community back. But if it's completely off the mark, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But in a week, if you can look kind of in your email then for a draft of the open booklet and give a link to that, make sure you're comfortable with it as a community member. We'll then kind of make that available online right away. We'll advertise it through social media. We'll do, and hopefully we can send out some copies by email as well through WCA and through others. We'll advertise the presence on the posters for the open house. So if you'd like to see the overview copy, you have to see it, go to the website and download a copy. And so we'll make it very easy for people to get. We'll have hard copies at the open houses, so they'll get that as well. But it will basically be kind of just everything we need to know about the study and all of the information right here distilled down to 8 pages or so. And this is something that we typically do in these things, and so I think you'll find once you read it, it's quite user-friendly and quite, hopefully quite informative.
Which you please include figure 1, 2, 1, 1, 2.
Do you want to show that? There we go. Yes, we would include that.
Very informative.
Yes, indeed.
That actually sums it up right there. That was a great photo. Yes. Great. 1.2. It just explains it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, for sure. You at the top at least.
Easier to throw rocks at.
We will at the open houses and online. We'll also have we call it a survey, but it's really kind of like a feedback. So we'll ask some questions, try to really get down to what people's concerns and interests are, given what we heard the open houses, given what they do.
Yes, really good job.
Used to be able to get them at the fire.
I
hall.
just looked it up.
I can speak to that, no, unfortunately. Just get able to get the fair hall, it's almost like. And not have that presence. But.
So how do you get one?
We will be, yes, we will like the. For new license? Yes, for new license.
Till they lose it.
But I'm still trying to blank. The question is, how do I get a new dog license?
No, where?
Where do I
You
get a
can
new
go
dog
online.
license?
You can go online.
Online.
Or there's a multitude of.
RDCO.com/docs. You can go see the forms, see the plus.
But I can't go to learn.
No, but you,
It's
but you-
outside. That's because it's essentially not.
but you can't purchase a new license online. Yes, and that and RDC, but RDCO, I have to say, RDCO is one of the few jurisdictions in BC that you can go to and purchase a new license online. You don't have to go anywhere. You have to go to your kitchen table. Expectations, excuse me, committee members. We would, if I may presume to kind of put this out here, we would really like to see committee members come to as many or all of the open houses as possible. I think it will be very important for the committee to hear what residents have to say and to hear that as a group. So whatever ones you're able to come to would be really helpful. There may be Jimmy's there, yes.
Are you offering?
I don't have one here.
Mr. Chair, thank you for your patience and allowing us to go through all that. That's a lot of material. I think we're finished our portion.
supported by Sandy. So, any additional questions, comments at all?
I just have one last one. It's about an article that came out in the Cologne Courier. And it's based upon the interim report. And I was kind of surprised that they got a hold of the interim report that passed. But why would it be published online before the committee even saw it? Because he's really taken this thing and, well, this is Ron, our report? Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's online.
It's published online after the committee received it.
Yeah, but I mean,
Board procedure bylaw, it's completely available.
because it's part of our agenda.
Because it's part of our
So we
agenda.
have to do that?
That's correct.
Yeah, well, just like any staff report to the board would be published online.
And I will also,
I just thought that the committee should see it first and have a chance to adjust some of the stuff. Because Mr. Seymour is not the most
well,
accurate.
he did
Reporter out there.
report verbatim from the interim report, so we can't control inaccurate statements from media. However, I can confirm that our communications department did reach out to Mr. Seymour.
Oh, okay, yeah, because,
Yeah, no, that's not, and thank you for clarifying that, Cory, and that's totally appropriate. This is a public committee and it's an agenda that we want to get published in advance, so it's.
I just thought that rather than the draft one be worked off, the real one tomorrow,
Yes.
there might be better.
We'll make sure we
information.
send him, we'll send him a special copy.
Put it in a binder. A nice binder.
Yes.
If we're ready to wind up, then we need a motion to adjourn the meeting. We have a mover and
A motion to adjourn the meeting.
Dwayne and Daryl, yeah.
Moving on. You guys
Talking
got this thing.
all the minutes
Yeah.
are.
Now, do you want to save our name tags for next
I
year?
want to take it.
Perfect. I'll do it.
Please.
So, please look for an email from us in about a week. Yes, yes.
So it's yeah, so that's probably.